Good morning, we're live. Today we're gonna continue our conversation that we didn't complete last week by discussing the most recent issue of Avant-Garde, our journal of peace, democracy, and science, titled In Battle for a New Civilization. There are especially many articles within the journal that are very important to discuss for this time. So we're gonna first start by continuing our conversation about those articles, including discussing with some of the authors of the articles. And then we'll transition into discussing what the restart of the US-Israel war against Iran means for the world and for the US people. So it should be a very full free school, and we look forward to having a pretty fruitful discussion. So I'll turn it over to Jeremiah to help open up our discussion about what some people are calling the best issue of Avant-Garde so far.
Thanks, Emily. The main reason why we wanted to continue talking about the new issue this week is because, one, I felt like we weren't able to fully cover everything that was in the issue last week, and so it's not just the individual authors, but I think collectively we do think that the ideas and the questions that are contained within this issue are some of the most important questions facing the American people and the world's people in this time. And I think it's pretty clear to everybody that this is a time when the world is going through tremendous changes. And so we're trying to speak directly to that and what we see as the kind of unresolved but important political questions, the ideological questions, the questions of knowledge that actually have to be raised in order to better understand this crisis, but also what is the way forward. And like Jahan said last week, the issue itself contains, and many of the articles themselves contain, a combination of both critique and a forward positive vision. And so we invited first Jahan and Meghna, who are tuning in or joining us from Chicago, and then we also have other people who worked on specific articles that we want to talk about for this first portion of Free School. And that is an article that Meghna wrote on immigration and immigrants themselves, an article that Shantanu wrote about the Epstein files and what it says about knowledge and science and the American university and war, and the ruling elite, I think, especially. And then also we wanted to talk about, after that docs interview that a few people worked on, so Alice and then maybe Nuri can also talk about that. But really we wanted to just start with like this question of, what are
the prison reform ministry?
Yeah, but we kind of talked about that last. But I mean, we can talk about it more.
Okay,
but Jahan, you should also feel free, and then Eddie and Shantanu if it comes up. Basically, I think we wanted to address like what these different pieces in Avant-Garde are saying, what the arguments are, and then to hear like how and why people wanted to write them in the way that they did, and how it speaks to this moment when there's so much happening in the world. And so I'm going to turn it over to Meghna, and then we'll go to Shantanu, and then we can talk for a little bit before going to docs and review.
Sure, thank you. And I heartily concur that I do believe that this is the best issue of Avant-Garde. I mean, just the breadth and the depth and the integrity of the articles and just the heart of them. Like I just felt like I was seeing everybody's heart and soul in what they were writing. And it was very beautiful. And I'm very proud of us and proud to be a part of this group of people. So the article I wrote, I guess I can start with why I wrote it. And the reason why I wrote about immigration is because right now, as so many of the articles have said, we are in the midst of a severe moral crisis. I mean, not just economic, but spiritual, political, a crisis of legitimacy, which we've covered many times in the free school. But at the heart of this crisis is really the way that we understand ourselves as an American people and the way that we have consented as an American people, or at least white civilization has consented to an unjust moral system. And thus the way out is a moral reckoning and a reconceptualization of who we are and what we could be. But I really feel immigration in particular is an issue that is a flashpoint in our times. And, you know, both conservatives and liberals frame it as an issue of identity and victimhood. You know, and whether you are for or against immigration is supposed to be what your view of America is. But from studying the Black freedom struggle, colonial struggle, I really think this whole debate is very shallow and doesn't really get at the heart of the questions that are facing us and the origins of this crisis. So my article kind of flips the question, is that it's not the stance you take on immigration, but it's the immigrant themselves who must ask a moral question about who they are and what immigration means. And basically the argument of the article, it's called Towards a Moral Stance on Immigration, but it's really, the real moral stance is that the immigrant must take a stance. And up till now, the stance that immigrants and immigration have taken is that they have consented to what Martin Luther King called the triple evils of society: racism, materialism, and militarism. And only in rejecting these triple evils can immigrants participate in the remaking of the American people. And only then can, you know, we as Americans find ourselves out of this crisis, find our way out of this crisis. And also, just very briefly, I'll just say personally, obviously many of us are the children of immigrants, but I think all of us felt, and that's all why we're in free school today, is that the immigrant identity is insufficient to becoming a truly moral person and living a life that fits with the moral compass and fits with, you know, justice and equality and decency. And we have seen and witnessed in our own lives, even in our own family lives, so much cowardice and complicity that has been justified through the immigrant identity. But it has been through the Black freedom struggle and the anti-colonial struggle that we have seen a way forward, and we've seen a path forward for our lives in who we want to be and how we want to live. And also, you know, finding our way back to what really produced us, which is what immigration is running away from, which is the anti-colonial struggles, which also have the most in common and share the same values of the Black freedom struggle. So, you know, just what was in the article? What is the argument? And like I said, the argument of the article is that immigrants have consented to the triple evils of racism, materialism, and militarism. And in racism, they've consented to an anti-Black system. It might not be the reason why people aren't saying, I want to come to America to become anti-Black, but that is what they end up participating in and consenting in. And what Du Bois calls a kind of innocence later becomes a very vicious kind of anti-Black racism. And that is the pattern of American history, and that is, you know, what defines white supremacy and constitutes it. So I argue that this is both documented and undocumented immigrants. This is immigrants as a whole. You know, in the case of documented immigrants, they're very often selected, you know, to be a part of processes that are premised on keeping American people uneducated, but you can just import people who, like in the case of doctors, Diane Nash says that because you have incarcerated so many of us, but you're able to import immigrants whose education has already been paid for and justify the continued replacement and oppression of us. But also even Silicon Valley, it's completely powered by immigrants. And it is Silicon Valley that is behind the war industrial economy. the knowledge war industrial economy. And so, yeah, I mean, it's the ideology of racism that keeps this very racist system going. But also, even in the case of undocumented immigration, undocumented immigration is what is preferred by the ruling elite. You know, we can be politically correct and say that, oh, like all workers have to unite, which is true, but the ruling elite prefers a traumatized and just a group of people who will do anything to become a part of empire than a principled movement that is rooted in the generational struggles of the American people. And you can even see concretely how, like in the case of the United Packing House Workers of America, you have this amazing union in Chicago that was fighting to transform the American people, systematically, you know, dismantled by undocumented immigration. And, you know, it is the immigrant identity, the people of color identity that is behind so much violence and racism towards Black people under the ideology is that if we can make it as disadvantaged minorities, why haven't Black people been able to? And there has been so much violence and evil by African immigrants, Asian immigrants, Latino immigrants. They have all consented to and been a part of this kind of anti-Black racism under the ideology of immigration. So that's kind of how immigrants uphold the first pillar of one of the triple evils of America. The second one, materialism. You know, a very important, you know, ideology of immigration is that we come to this country so that we can provide a better life for our children, a better material life, a life which we were not able to have in our home countries. And thus there's a sort of nobility in coming to America and, you know, fighting, like pursuing the American dream, all of that. But there's really, the argument I make is that, really using the work of James Baldwin, is that this is actually in effect pursuing a kind of safety. You know, Baldwin really makes this point that people who search for safety are actually abandoning the collective moral human responsibility they have to humanity. And so immigrants can come here, but they never really, they're really just putting off the questions that they are going to have to face of, you know, the crises of not only of this country, but of all countries. You have to fight for all humanity. You can't just try to save your children, and you'll end up condemning your children anyways. And, you know, even if immigrants don't have, even if immigrants, they might not know about the Black freedom struggle, but they are rejecting the examples of anti-colonial leaders that produced them, including Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, Mao, Ho Chi Minh. All of these leaders did not choose this path that immigrants have chosen of, I'm going to sacrifice everything, I'm going to leave my country behind in order to have a better life for my children. They have said, all children of the world are my children, and I will not shelter my children or try to keep my children in safety. I'm going to fight for freedom for all and justice for all. And that's really the same kind of choice that Black Americans have made, whether in the Children's March in Birmingham, or so many other examples of rejecting materialism and rejecting this idea of safety. And so, yeah, so that's my second critique of immigration. And then the third is militarism. And, you know, the way that immigrants consent to militarism is, I mean, it's very simple. You're consenting to join an empire that denies freedom to the very countries that you come from. And this really starts at the very beginning of the process. I mean, even, I was looking at the application to get a green card, but you have to check, I have never been a member of the Communist Party. And this is just, I mean, even if you were never a member of the Communist Party, you're still consenting to a Cold War ideology that has kept so many nations and struggles for freedom in darkness. You know, yeah, I mean, and there's also such a clear connection between, you know, there's such a clear connection between immigrants and the diaspora and the elites of these nations. For the example of India, there's so many, you know, think tanks and both on the left and the right that promote a very pro-US, pro-Zionist, or a very anti-India, anti-freedom struggle worldview, just as an example, but I think the examples are quite generalizable. Yeah, and so, I mean, in the most extreme examples, you have immigrants like Marco Rubio or, Iranian Americans saying, please bomb Iran. We represent the Iranian people. But that is also one of the ways that immigrants uphold the triple evils. And yeah, I mean, so, I mean, you have this very devastating examples of cowardice and complicity that, whereas immigrants are presented as the underdogs, they're actually complicit in creating the very crisis that we have today of poverty, unemployment, and just complete moral and spiritual collapse. But one of the arguments I try to make is that there is a way forward. You can make a moral choice to refuse to consent to the triple evils, but you can only do this by going to the Black freedom struggle and by going towards the anti-colonial struggles, both of which immigrants are trying to run away from. And so, the examples, I mean, we talked a lot about E.S. Reddy, who he never became a U.S. citizen, but he did come to the U.S. and participated in the Indian freedom struggle. And being a part of the Indian freedom struggle led him to identify with both the African American freedom struggle and the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. And so he becomes this great figure bridging these struggles while fighting for humanity and never losing what produced him. But also figures like Vito Marco Antonio, who I won't talk too much about, but is also a heroic figure that was very respected by W.E.B. Du Bois. And even the example of Master Fard Muhammad, who is a very sacred figure in the Nation of Islam. And he himself was an immigrant from the East, but he did not become a part of the white world as so many immigrants did. But actually he recognized God in Black people, in the poorest Black people in Detroit. He saw the best examples of and potential for moral and spiritual fulfillment. And so, yeah, I think the argument I'm trying to make is that in order to find a way out of this crisis, immigrants must make a different moral choice. And they must, sacrifice, which is, consent to the triple evils means you're running away from sacrifice, but everybody has to pay what Baldwin called the price of the ticket. So, yeah, that's basically the article in a nutshell. And yeah, I'll open it up if anybody has any questions.
Maybe we can go first to Shantanu and then.
Can I just one point, Megan, that's a great article, but I think there is a deep ideological capture of immigrants, which may have begun in their countries. And the difference, let us say, between the immigrants, let's say the Irish or Italian or Eastern Europeans who came in the millions from 1880 to 1920, we're talking not about colonialism or ascendant capitalism, we're now talking about neo-colonialism and capitalism and American empire in decline. But, and I think every Black person kind of feels this personally, because the argument of almost every immigrant that you will meet, African, Asian, Latin America, is that, well, Black people are trying to get ahead by protest when we will get ahead by hard work. That is one of the most anti-Black racist claims. That if Black people would stop protesting and stop being angry and work hard like we immigrants, you could get ahead. This is particularly biting because then you have the liberal kind of establishment supporting this claim,
Yeah.
which is the further marginalization and so on of black people, but a direct attack upon the freedom movement that is responsible for immigrants having any freedom in this country. It is, yeah, I just wanted to say that I could, deeply emotional, and it's an ideological attack upon black people, and most immigrants provide aid and comfort to the most racist elements. And the quote, failures of young black people in public schools and in universities, and the fact that we don't perform as highly as many Asians do on standardized tests is used against us. And yeah, I feel it's a moral and an ideological question. And the question, as you say, with E.S. Reddy and such people as him, they chose a side.
If I can just add to that, I also think that one of the major motivations for this publishing this article is that I think we basically feel that immigration has been used as a very important tool of counter-revolution in the generation, or maybe 2 generations since the era of the Civil Rights Movement and Third American Revolution. Because I think even in conducting this research, Magna found that in the Civil Rights era, they would not have been able to predict that this immigration would turn into something so reactionary. I mean, they were fighting basically to King and them. They were fighting to remove any racial restrictions in immigration and remove racial criteria from all federal laws. But the way in which the ruling class then weaponized that to import all these people who were not white but could basically, further the ruling class, and what Doc was describing and what Megna said, further the triple evils, has been something very vicious. And I think all of us who are basically products of that also feel very angry about the fact that immigration, we basically were brought here to play a counter-revolutionary role, and we see the kind of devastation that's caused in Black America and how it's allowed the American war machine in so many ways to continue to target the children of the world. But I think that it is important that we are giving this moral call based in King and saying that it's not going to be a liberal paternalism for the immigrants that's the answer. It's going to have to be holding them to moral criteria. But I also think the free school is evidence that you do have some people who will respond to that moral call. And I definitely agree with Doc about the ideological capture as well. I mean, definitely the U.S. has worked hard to promote this image of itself in all of these societies and capture the education systems and various things like that.
Yeah, and I think it
Can I
also
just say
relates
one other
to
thing,
Doc's
Meg,
concept of a white.
Meg, just one other thing
Oh,
I'd
go
like to
ahead.
say. I know we talk about the triple evils. I think there's a 4th evil, and no, that's criminalization. And once, and immigrants can easily consent to the imprisonment and criminalization of millions of black people, especially young black males, and accept the idea that young black males are inherently violent and coded through DNA and other things to be criminal in their behavior. So I would just add a 4th dimension. I'm sorry to cut you off, Meg.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was just going to say that I think the triple evils formulation is powerful, but it's the white supremacist social system.
Yeah.
Like this, it's just a much deeper system than, and it's just an incredibly profound and evil method of oppression and cruelty.
Yeah, and I think it's also that for immigrants, it closes part of their humanity as well, and not being able to see Black people in this country. Whether it is because the poor are Black in this country, the criminalized are Black, and to shut yourself off to Black folk is to shut yourself off to the least of us in this society and our humanity. And I think that, I mean, in free school, we've talked about how in this society, when that happens, what happens to the human being that shuts off their humanity in order to succeed and achieve at the expense of others. And I think the other thing is that now is also a critical moment for this question on immigration, because in previous decades, you can say that America was ascendant and justify a comfortable life, justify even from a moral perspective that America is a place of democracy and morality. But I think in this moment where the evil of American society and its wars against the world, where the world, Afro-Asia is in, or Asia and Africa are in ascendant, or specifically Africa and Asia are in ascendancy, and there is this question of, are you actually or I guess what I'm trying to say is that when the world is shifting and there is this idea that America is evil and this system that immigrants have put their lot in is an immoral system, what do you do at this point? And I think it still is a question for people, which is that, I mean, specifically for Chinese Americans or the children of Chinese immigrants, is that do you make the moral choice to fight in this country, or do you just go back to China, where others have fought, and you get to reap the benefits of it, but never have to struggle?
Right.
And yeah, I would just add that.
Yeah, I feel like it is important to say that immigrants are propped up and let themselves be used as basically the only evidence at this point of a system that is supposedly successful, when actually like the system is failing. Like I think, Doc, what you were saying, that the only rational or like true logical way to understand this society is that the system is broken. And that's why Black folk are so important, because they have been resisting that system which is evil. And they have struggled in the only way that is actually like reasonable to struggle, which is in a revolutionary collective way. Whereas immigrants instead are like, no, actually maybe the system's not broken, and if we all just like went along to get along, then like it would all be good. And I feel like that is basically the conflict of the moral choice. And I think one other thing that was really interesting about Magna, your article, is basically when you're saying like broadly the 20th century was a time of like people exercising their agency and like these world freedom struggles, and almost like what an anomaly it is for in the 20th century like this immigrant group to be created that has no loyalty to like either freedom struggle, like whether of their original civilizations or in this country. And that identity of like the immigrant or the refugee or the migrant is presented as almost like a modern kind of human being who like is borderless or like cosmopolitan or whatever. But like that is in stark contrast to, I think, our sense of like the modern human being who is so connected to world humanity through like these struggles for freedom. But yeah, just this thing of like, if you're able to produce a group of people who have no loyalty to civilization, like what does that actually, like how can that group of people be used or leveraged?
Yeah, I think this article is really important in this time. The way, Doc, you said that it is right now, 2026, in a moment of where all bets are off, and you have, on one hand, the collapse of not just, America, not just the American empire, but even the assumptions of America being strong and sustainable and lasting. But then on the other side, like the way that Megan, you started your article, it's also a moment of severe self-conceptualization, where the American people are forced to contend with the most paramount question of all times in the 250th year, which is, who are we as a people? Because we're not a people yet. We're not a nation yet. And like Lawson said, like we are citizens of a nation that does not exist yet. And in order for the nation to be achieved, the human beings, the people on this continent will have to do the most difficult task of all, which is not just doing the thing, but to actually define and then enact in your own individual lives and through political collective struggle the values which you think human beings deserve or best emulates the ideals that we've set forth or like want to define ourselves by or want our children, the values we want our children to be socialized with. I feel like it's interesting because the article shows that, and maybe people can challenge me on this, but I think immigrants, especially, and I'm not talking about like all immigrants, I'm talking about the immigrants from the darker nations, right? Africa, Asia, Latin America. And like I can speak mainly even about Asians in particular, and maybe I'm biased because I am the daughter of Chinese immigrants, but I think immigrants in particular expose the hypocrisy of quote unquote democracy the most. And it's because you know how like in the 50s, 60s, people would say like, oh, like Baldwin, for example, focused a lot on the guilt of white people or how it's not just the condition of black folk, it's not just the condition of black people that exposes the cracks of democracy in this country, but it is the way that white people have dehumanized themselves. But the interesting thing is that in this time period, I actually think it's the immigrants who are the most, in some ways, embody the democratic hypocrisies. Because, I mean, look at Mamdani. It is the children of these key generations of immigrants to this country. 80s, 90s, like 70s, 80s, 90s, I'd say 80s, 90s. Those waves of immigrants to this country. It is those children who are now the leaders or potential leaders of this country. It's not white people, actually. It's immigrants being propped up for white interests. That is the crazy part. It is us, like me, like us in this room, our peers, who are the most potentially wielded. They're most likely to become the CEOs or the largest health systems or the largest like corporations or the deciders. So we are convenient dark face in the place of white people, but we are enacting an imperialist agenda, a white agenda. And that is why it is so important to wage an ideological struggle for this. Because actually, like, the interesting thing is, like, at my labor union, like, first of all, I'm the only Asian staffer. I'm the only non-white or non-black staff member in my whole union. And I don't think that's coincidental. And it's like, and it's so funny because I really know not just black workers in Pennsylvania, but I know a lot of white workers in Pennsylvania and like rural white people. And the interesting thing is there's a lot of potential unity in certain types of white and black folk. But then sometimes I actually genuinely think I'm like, white and black workers are the service workers, and then the doctors in the hospitals are all Asian. And like just this past week, there was a doctor who told these hospital workers who were supposed to go on strike, he said to these white, I think they're Trump voters, the Trump supporting white working class people, this Indian doctor looked at them and said, you guys should feel lucky to even I don't know why you're even striking. You guys should feel lucky that you live in America and that you're making the wages you do, because like in the third world in third world countries, like you would be so poor. How dare you come to this country and tell these white workers who are trying to struggle, not just for themselves, but to say, why is it right for healthcare systems which are exploiting poor people every day, but exploiting their workers and making all this money? How dare you come to me and tell me that I should feel lucky to be getting what I'm given? This is the ideological struggle, and at the end of the day, like, I think the reason why I also think immigrants in particular show in some ways help us define what really the revolutionary struggle is today, is that immigrants, it's not, because like a lot of immigrants are also poor or working class in this country. It's an ideological question. It is like an ideological and moral question, not an economic question. It is an ideological and moral question of not just changing the systems, but about how will human beings relate in this country. How you relate to Black folk in this country is also a question of how you understand the purpose of even society or civilization. Like, what are your children worth? Your children can go to an Ivy League university, but they're not gonna have a soul. And so, yeah, so that's why I think this article is really important, and I just think more and more it's gonna become, like, it's gonna play a role.
Yeah.
Especially with especially with the increasing opportunities of an anti-war struggle. Not even a peace struggle yet, but a people struggle against war. I see the potential in a lot of, honestly, I have to be honest, I see a lot of potential in not just Black folk who are definitely anti-war, but I see it in a lot of white people who are anti-Israel, anti-war. And sometimes I think there's a question on the table is how many of the remaining confounding factors, people at play, like these are the very complex ideological questions that have to be raised.
Can I? Okay, so I think Emily kind of reminded me that Baldwin also spoke of a historical migration from Europe to America. And I remember that, I think on Being White and Other Lies, in his essay, he says that nobody who's well settled in Europe ever came to America. It was those who were criminals and those who were escaping the law. They are the ones who chose to leave Europe and come to America. And that is probably not the same for immigrants of today, but they are sort of given this image that you can escape something from your own country and come here and achieve something that you would never get back in the third world. I think I agree with you. A kind of ideological capture does begin in their own countries.
Yeah.
And I feel like when all of these nations during the later half of the 19th century got independence, the more crucial part probably comes after that, which is the nation building part. And that is the part which is going to be difficult, it's going to be very hard. You know, India suffered famine, and we had resource issues and land management issues, but there were those who believed in the foundational principles of the Indian freedom struggle and chose to stay and help build the country. And then there are those people who thought this is too hard, we're not even under British rule anymore, why is it still so hard? And so they decided to leave. And I think that those people, and this is an observation, and people can disagree with me, but I've typically observed that when people leave their home countries and come to America, they kind of form a snapshot or a freeze frame of how India or China or Vietnam or wherever was at that time, and that never seems to change. They will always think, like even now, if you talk to immigrant parents who have children here, they will think that India is still as backwards or underdeveloped as it was in the 1980s. And it's not true, and I believe that even that can't be true, but they have to believe it in a way to kind of justify their continued presence in this country. And I think that you can really see that which category of people the ruling class really, really cares about when you think about the ICE protests that happened because of immigration laws, but then you don't see that kind of outrage when Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is struck by the Supreme Court. Anything that targets the Black population is not given as much prestige or coverage as this immigration issue.
Can I
Yeah, yeah,
follow
go
with that? I actually I just want to emphasize again, Magna, I appreciate this article like a lot for the moment we're going through now. And even, I know you had started working on this article in January, or like at the beginning of the year, when I think all of these, the ICE killings of like these two white folk in Minneapolis, like really were starting to spark a lot of those conversations of like, where will even 2026, or like, what is the headwinds that the American people are facing? But actually, I feel like we're, seeing, two more like ICE shootings this week, and it's also that question rearing its ugly head, but actually to step back and be able to reframe it as it is actually important to understand the battlefield that this declining empire is trying to put us on, which is to divide, to incite, to create all these flashpoints for the American people to not really know one another, or to use the question of immigration and and really even give more fuel to even the liberal side, which will continue to be I have to protect these victims of immigration law. They are so I feel so much pity for them. That's the liberal stance. But actually, you have to understand that immigrants are not victims. In fact, they're making so many of these choices voluntarily, consciously, as much as we're giving the benefit of the doubt that many of them may not truly know the the Black proletariat, because they have been kept in so many ways from Black folk. But at the same time, I appreciate that you even wove in Rick Chow's murder of that 14-year-old earlier this year, and this 14-year-old Black boy, and on top of what we're talking about in terms of criminalization, it makes so much sense that that didn't happen in isolation. There's such a long pattern of Asian store owners that operate in Black neighborhoods, and have not only so much suspicion but animus towards Black folk and young Black folk, young Black men in particular. And if that is the encounters that Black folk are having with immigrants on a daily basis, you can't help but Black folk are not gonna stop asking these questions that I feel we're raising here. What is your moral stance on whiteness? Just because you're an immigrant and you're quote unquote colored or darker, from a darker peoples, are you actually asking these questions of a moral and ideological nature in this time? What is your relationship to us? And so I just appreciate that. I know it wasn't the easiest article to write, but I appreciate that we had to go to those places, because we do have to redefine the battleground and the questions, and immigration can't be, I think, one of those things that people take easy answers or easy paradigms or answers out of actually confronting all of these questions that the American people have to move through in order to get to the remaking or the reconceptualization and the hardest kind of struggle that there is.
Yeah, I think this article is extremely well timed, because the increasing amount of confusion that I feel is occurring because of the activity of ICE. I think somewhat decently justified response that people have of seeing ICE killing people. I think that's a concern. I don't want to live in a country that you can do that to somebody, anybody really. And so I think a lot of people can identify it as a kind of ostentatious, brazen display of white supremacy that they would naturally want to oppose. Which I think that's good. I don't want to live in a white supremacist society either. But I think you're able to identify a really deep contradiction, which is that the immigrant, herself, can actually assume these positions of whiteness in the society. And a great irony of, let's say, this ICE killings is that I'm seeing a lot of these people are actually there's Latino immigrants that are responsible for killing other Latino immigrants in the name of, I would say, white supremacy on behalf of white people.
Say that one more time.
Some of the ICE agents.
The ICE agents are Latino.
A lot of the ICE agents are Latinos. You'll have, let's say, a Mexican immigrant who I don't know what they might be a second generation immigrant. Their parents probably were immigrants, and then they were born and raised here. Dark skinned. They don't look like white people, and yet they're the ones wearing the uniform, and they'll do to these immigrants this kind of violence that even white people are like that. I don't really identify with that. I don't want to do that to another dark person. I don't, and yet they're doing it, and I feel like it's not really talked about because people don't know how to deal with it. Because I think Meghna's article is able to clarify how immigrants are able to assume this position of whiteness. And this is like a more extreme example. Obviously, I don't think most people are actively carrying on violence on behalf of white people. But I think very broadly, people are consenting to it consciously. And if you didn't know, now Meghna's going to let you know unconsciously. This is actually the decision that you've made, and you have a choice to make. And we're in a time where there is an active struggle that is being called for by people to oppose, violence on behalf of white supremacy. Let us say in the war in Iran, and if you take the position that I come from, an oppressed people, and I can't struggle because otherwise I will face consequences because where I come from is so oppressed and so backwards. I mean, if you have these children that will walk in front of, let's say, some critical infrastructure that Trump said he's going to bomb, and you're willing to say, I'm going to risk my life and I'm going to put my life on the line for struggle, as opposed to, it's not unreasonable to seek comfort or shelter from a bomb, but you're able to make that moral position, take that moral position, then I don't see why me, you, anyone else cannot take some kind of moral position. And so the immigrants' justification is not sufficient. Never has been, but certainly not in this time period. I thank you for making that clarification, Meghna.
Yeah. We've been talking about the immigration question. I have something to add. We've been talking about the immigration question since 2016. And it hasn't gotten any easier because people, will say like, oh well, immigrants are under attack. Like, why are you saying these things? But yeah, so I just wanted to say like it is a hard question to address. So like I appreciate Meghna being a soldier and everything. And the Democratic Party has this strategy of, for example, I was thinking about back in 2016 with Meghna and Jahan when we were organizing immigrants in Upper Darby. The field was like ripe for the picking for organizations like ours to be picked up by NGOs associated with the Democratic Party, especially with politically underrepresented groups like Asians and Latin Americans, Southeast Asians, but the Democratic Party's strategy is to basically say like, oh, there are all these immigrant groups, there are all these categories of people that they have all these quote unquote interests, like New York, Muslims from this place have these sorts of interests, business interests, maybe all the Bangladeshis have like a taxi cab. But the failure of this strategy that's important for us to point out is that, whiteness is not just something that is your skin color and, it looks like this. It's not a skin strategy. Whiteness is a moral choice, to use the Baldwinian argument. And the moral choice being made by these immigrants that you're pointing out is to consent basically to the system, and innocence is not an argument. And over time, the Democratic Party will see that these votes aren't guaranteed, like the midterms, the recent Trump election. There's a lot of articles about the Democratic Socialists in the Midwest, and all the neoliberals are saying, oh, well, these people might do well in New York, but they're not going to do well in moderate states, where they've idealized, like, a Dakota voter or Michigan voter as a white worker. But there are a lot of immigrants who will vote Republican in those states because, quite frankly, as I've said before, Arab Americans have always been, before the George W. Bush election, they voted Republican. Before 9/11, Arabs always voted Republican because the Democrats were closer to Israel and because they were small business owners. A lot of immigrants are small business owners.
And they were considered white on the census.
And they was considered, Arabs were considered white or Caucasian. And so, yeah, I don't think it's guaranteed. The last thing I wanted to say was it was through the year of Gandhi, and it really became clear to me that so now we're at the stage we're at now. I'm the child of someone who made decisions to come to this country because they had preconceived notions of what America was all about, and now what? And it was made really clear to me during the year of Gandhi that even if I run away from America, and I've had friends who say, well, I speak another language, let me just take my passport and leave. Without the black struggle to clarify the colonial struggle, like it's not just like, oh, I can't just be a Gandhian and move somewhere and learn Gandhi, but it's Gandhi completed by King or made clear by King in this struggle that it's not just for an Indian freedom struggle for Indians, but a Kingian struggle for all people, like a world house. And I guess that's what Lawson meant when he said that African Americans are like a bridge people, because they're neither American nor African, but they demonstrate a new human being, the capacity for a new human being. When whiteness, and I'll just say finally, lastly, when all these immigrants who come to this country and have made these consenting choices to join whiteness, when this thing that doesn't really exist collapses on them, they'll have nothing left. Not materially, of course there'll be plenty materially, but what constructs a person, what we call the deep plumbing. The deep plumbing, the civilization, the soul, the deep plumbing. I'm done.
Can I ask a question?
Well, I just want to raise a few quick points. And also we should probably get to Shantanu's article too. But
What about the comments?
oh yeah, comments.
Do you want to make your points first?
Okay, I'll make a few quick points, which were, one, I appreciate that Magna starts the article by presenting Mamdani and Trump as foils for each other. And the position that Magna is attempting to carve out doesn't follow the assumptions of either side. Because if you actually take seriously the kind of white nationalist, etc. view of immigration, it's that they believe that immigrants cannot assimilate into American culture and American society, which they understand as white American culture and society. And so they say all these, especially these darker immigrants, like the Haitians, especially the darker skinned Latinos, maybe not the Asians, but that like their problem is that they are dangerous, they cannot be assimilated, they don't want to assimilate. And then on the flip side, as people have pointed out, I think oftentimes either the liberal leftist conception of immigrants, part of that assumption is that it doesn't really grant much agency to the immigrants themselves. And so I think that Magna is making a really important intervention by actually trying to focus directly on what are the choices that immigrants themselves can make, and what choices, like I think Kathy said, what are the choices that they're already making? And I think I wanted to also pick up on this term of sacrifice that Magna used, because I think, actually, if you think about it, the idea of sacrifice is very important to the immigrant narrative. Because if you grew up the child of immigrants, your parents will tell you constantly, I made all these sacrifices to be here so that you could live a life where you don't have to make those kinds of sacrifices and you don't have to worry. I think actually if there's anything that I would feel like defines the immigrant mentality, it's that I work hard, I work hard so that you don't have to worry. I feel like immigrants hear that all the, children of immigrants.
So you don't have to struggle.
So you don't have to struggle, you don't have to worry, but I took on my struggle, my sacrifice, so that you don't have to struggle in that way. And a lot of times it may not be the most overt kinds of anti-black racism that Magna talks about or that we know exists, but I think that idea of like sacrifice, that idea of struggle is very baked into the immigrant.
Oh yeah, and it puts the individual immigrant who makes
Right.
that argument on a moral pedestal.
Right. And
I
so,
am moral.
Right, and so what we want to do is we're not just trying, because again, as the child of an immigrant, we're not just trying to dunk on immigrants,
Yeah.
but we're trying to say, okay, well, let's take that idea of sacrifice seriously. Let's take that idea of struggle seriously. And recognize the fact that no matter how much liberals might try to say we are a nation of immigrants, no person can remain an immigrant forever.
Yeah.
You cannot, no people can remain immigrants forever.
Especially your children.
Especially because you have children. Children will live here in this society. They cannot cling to an immigrant identity forever. So then the question is, what are you going to do? What are your children going to do to actually, because I think the part of it that I also really appreciate about Magna's article is that the reality is that yes, immigration is one of these most like controversial, hot button, actually pressing questions that has presented itself in the current like American crisis. But I think the reality is that immigrants, and especially their children, are confronted by a much larger crisis that they never anticipated coming here. And actually, it's interesting because if you like kind of look beyond the curtain of a lot of the ways that people like Tucker Carlson might talk about immigration, is that actually their worry is that white civilization, the white race is dying out, basically.
That's true.
And I actually think that it's a really interesting question because, again, if you go to the actual immigrant mentality, part of what's baked into the assumption is, I want my children to live lives that are closer to white Americans.
Yeah.
And so what happens when those white Americans themselves are like, I don't know if this whiteness thing is working out for me anymore. I don't know if I have a future. What becomes the frame of reference for all these immigrants? And in many ways, it becomes an almost, they have to work extra hard to try to then become the model of essentially white America that maybe their parents envisioned when they came
Or
here.
could we say to reinvent?
To reinvent what whiteness is. And
with Asian characteristics.
Asian, or it could be Latinos, or it could be African. Honestly,
absolutely,
it could be like Arab Americans too.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like it's not limited to Asians, I
To
think.
reinvent.
And so I think that is part of the question, like, and I really appreciate that Magna brought up these questions of war. And because I think that is, to me, that is like the most visceral, the most extreme case where you have all these Miami Cubans, for example, whose like sole purpose for being is literally so that they can destroy Cuba and destroy the Cuban Revolution. All of these so-called Persian Americans, whose sole reason for being in America is so that they can influence American foreign policy to destroy Iran. And it's like, that is an extreme example, but I think that kind of mentality is more pervasive than I think people realize, and I think it exposes a lot of the underlying tensions and assumptions that are baked into these, like, what I feel like are oftentimes very superficial or surface level debates about immigration. And I appreciate that Magna is articulating an alternative, almost like an alternative framing of the entire question itself, rather than just conceding ground to either the quote left or right idea about what immigration represents, but actually taking seriously the agency of the children, especially the children of immigrants and immigrants themselves.
Can I say something? Yeah. I'll try to be brief. I think this question of immigration also has deep contradictions, but I think part of the reason why personally I'm also very hard on immigrants is because of the opportunity as well. I think they've been ideologically captured to uphold this vision of American empire. But at the same time, immigrants, because of having come from different another civilization to this American society, represent also an opportunity, should they make the moral choice, actually, to see both civilizations, this civilization and the civilization that they come from. And in the concrete, I mean, it means that for immigrants that are in this country, propping up this idea that America is this democratic place that you can make money, and expressing those narratives when they are traveling to the countries that they come from. And the flip is if you can actually see the crisis in American society, but also where the struggle in American society is, to actually be a bridge between among countries of the world and civilizations among the world. And rather than to look down upon the least of us in this country, and also the least of those in the countries that you come from, to actually see your role, or to see the moral stance as the uplift of all people. And I think that's why oftentimes, I think the free school being children of immigrants and seeing it, I mean, personally, I'm the most critical of Chinese immigrants because I think it is an opportunity. It's such an opportunity. I don't know if it's the opportunity for world peace, but it is an opportunity because you have these interactions that are available to you in the society and also from the civilizations that you come from to explain the situation here and to also explain what actually defines America, not the one that you see on television or by the ruling elite or by the most white immigrants in this country.
Yeah, I just wanted to say on this point of ICE, which is obviously something that's been in the news a lot. I think that the brutality of ICE, you cannot disconnect from the criminalization process that has happened to Black people, because with this thesis that we have of the centrality of the Black worker, it means that the vicious attack on the Black worker is a vicious attack on democracy as a whole. And so now with 40 to 50 years of very brutal criminalization of Black people, which we tried to, cover in part in our prison reform report, it's created a situation where America has become such an undemocratic and authoritarian and repressive state. And I feel that the brutality that ICE has been visiting upon Latino people, white people, and others is basically that repressive apparatus now beginning to target those, target other people, giving a sort of a preview or a taste of what the Black community has experienced now for 4 or 5 decades. And but in many ways, I think it has the potential to be a wake-up call. And but this is also the contradiction, as Eddie and others are raising, that it is the wages of whiteness are running out for a significant chunk of white people have realized that the wages of whiteness are running out. It's many of the immigrants who are a little behind or significantly behind on that, and clearly the ruling class is trying to reconsolidate, redefine whiteness, and even a new political leadership through the immigrant. But I think that, again, this moral awakening has to be put before everyone. Everyone has to basically now contend with the crisis at home and the genocides that are being waged abroad. And also on this point of, no one can remain with the syllogism of the satisfied. If you recall from The World in Africa, I think many of the immigrants are stuck in the syllogism of the satisfied, but that is something that I think is also coming under crisis. But also on this point Jeremiah raised about sacrifice, I think it is significant that when you look at the question of sacrifice, no one has sacrificed more than the Black freedom struggle. What we've been talking about with Birmingham, with literally children marching in the streets, like that is the ultimate form of sacrifice for all humanity, not just sacrifice for one's own family or clan. And what I really appreciated in Megna's article is how she looked at these cases of these freedom fighters like Gandhi, like Mandela, who basically said that I am willing to sacrifice my children's future. They said that and their parents, their children are very angry. I've met some of Gandhi's grandchildren. I think they have a lot of resentment, and they're ideologically very thrown off as a result of it, and along with other things. But they made this clear stance that I will not put my individual children's future above my nation's future or above humanity's future. And I think that's kind of what you see even with the Birmingham campaign and other examples, that it's about the immortal child. It's not about a person's specific child. And I think that is the kind of the highest level of democratic thought that is possible, and kind of, you know, what the American people have to take up as a whole.
Right. I just want to say one quick thing about sacrifice, just that I think it's a different kind of sacrifice. One is a sacrifice rooted in guilt, which is expecting something in return. I've sacrificed for you, and then you now, you know, reap the benefits materially and take care of me. But the revolutionary sacrifice is a sacrifice for humanity, expecting nothing in return. You know, like, I will sacrifice, I'll give my life. All I ask is that you see the truth and you know the truth and you live by the truth. Yeah, it's just a fundamentally different thing, but it is something common to humanity. It is a common heritage of civilization. And that universal truth, it was coming together through the anti-colonial struggle, which is why immigration is such a horrible distortion of a process that was naturally unfolding. You know, even as we prepare for this trip where Doc is coming to India, all these beautiful connections, like Indira Gandhi embracing Coretta Scott King and the Black freedom struggle and the peace movement. And then you contrast that with something like consent to criminalization. To say that, you know, on the one hand, you're seeing people as prophets and visionaries and artists. On the other hand, you're consigning people to being criminals. And it's just, it could not be more opposite of one another and more evil. You know, it's, yeah, I was also thinking about King and how he says we have to contend with the reality of evil. You know, and I think to me that is, immigration is linked to contending with those questions. What is evil? What drives someone towards evil, participating, consenting in evil? And I think the studying immigration shows some of the ways that you think people are good, but they can make the choice to be evil.
Silence is betrayal.
Silence is betrayal. Yeah, at times. Yeah, but yeah, thank you all so much. Also, should obviously say that so many of the points in discussion was in concert with other people, and just thank you all for your contribution because, you know, yeah, thank you. Just appreciate you all very much.
Could I ask, I mean, it's a question for Samir, but anybody. Well, first of all, just in schools, where immigrant children, especially Asian immigrant children, but all immigrant children, in a school where they're Black and Asian and Latino immigrants, that Black children are made to feel that they're undeserving. And the children of immigrants, and you all probably experienced this, you all are more or less pampered or encouraged. Well, you all may have gone to mainly white schools, but take a school like South Philadelphia High School, where you have Black children. The Black children are made and are treated as they're undeserving poor, and immigrants are deserving poor.
Interesting.
So even a poor immigrant child is treated better than a poor Black child in schools. And there's this hierarchy of empathy and sympathy and the ordering of who deserves what. But that's just one thing. But I want to ask Samir or anybody this question, the Mamdani phenomenon, you know, who paints himself as an immigrant and speaks on behalf of immigrants. And by the way, he started as an outsider, but when he ran in the general election, he was embraced by the most powerful Democrats in the state of New York and the city of New York. Because don't forget, he was running against Cuomo and Eric Adams, two establishment Democrats. And he gets the support of the governor of New York and many others. So, but I just want to ask you, I mean, I know Samir, what does the rise of Mamdani and social democracy suggest for the future of American politics? I don't know if I'm making any sense.
I mean, there's so many angles to the question, you know, because I'm not really from New York. I mean, I've visited since he won, but yeah, let's just keep it in Philly and, you know, Cheryl Parker this obsession with Southwest Philly and, you know, calling it Africa Town.
Yes.
Like, trying to make it something that it isn't. Like, I'm sorry, I've been to every part of, like, Philly, but nobody wants to visit Southwest Philly. You know, it's, it's not, it's this, a rebrand of Southwest Philly. You know, I guess it's sort of similar to what they did to Temple. Instead of calling it Cecil B. Moore, calling it Temple Town. I guess, you know, one angle I could take is that it follows the pattern of, you know, when they were talking about the stadium near Chinatown, and Helen Gim came out against that. A lot of Chinatown is, first of all, it's not even Chinese in Philly, it's Southeast Asian, and they're all small business owners. And there was a lot of people, you especially noticed at the Cambodian night market, small business owners supporting Helen
Can I
Gim.
just interrupt you? The only thing I'm asking, Mamdani is the face of progressive politics nationally. And what does that mean when previously the face of progressive politics tended to be black?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to get to that because Helen Gim is the progressive city councilwoman. And you see immigrants supporting her and immigrants supporting Mamdani. My question is it because of the immigrant identity and, you know, a pursuit of justice? I would say no, it's more of a class position of the immigrants joining the middle class. And
Interesting.
to answer the Mamdani part more directly, you know, Mamdani, when he speaks, he doesn't talk about the black freedom struggle, the civil rights struggle. He jumps back to a New Deal, and that's characteristic of that's characteristic of social democrats in general. And you know, I think that I'd have to think about it more, but the social democrats are they, you know, we you know, the social democrats.
It's just like Magna sets it up, Trump and Mamdani in the beginning.
Yeah, exactly.
And therefore,
but it's a white choice either way. There is no world house choice.
there's no world,
There's no black choice, rich people choice, or the Mamdani choice. Even though you know, and it's interesting because his father wrote the book, you know, Good Muslim, Bad Muslim, and he's basically become a good Muslim. You know, he's a good Muslim that white people can vote for.
And he supersedes Martin Luther King.
Yeah, I mean,
just like Obama supposedly superseded.
Yeah, in that way, he's replaced as the progressive icon.
Right.
Right. Can I definitely see a transition from Obama to Mamdani, and I think it's very significant that Obama has so wholeheartedly embraced Mamdani, because I was looking back at some articles from Glenn Ford and others back in 2004, 2005, and at that time it seemed like Obama was positioning himself as the most progressive figure in American national politics, and used that to become president, but really just all it was a rebrand or facelift of U.S. imperialism. And then you go from that to Mamdani, and I think in a time in which America is facing such a crisis of legitimacy, the ruling class, I feel the ruling class is more willing to embrace social democracy. Whether you look at Mamdani or even, I appreciate that interview that Jeremiah shared of Ro Khanna, because they're even trying to co-opt the Palestine movement, because they kind of realize that both of these parties are in a deep crisis. So they're I think desperate for a way of rebranding the Democratic Party. But also to Doc's point, I don't have the full answer, but I think it's interesting to compare Harold Washington's election as mayor to Mamdani's election as mayor, because really I think Harold Washington should be considered the most progressive mayor of the, you know, modern, maybe last 50 years, not Mamdani. But it was also so different because the Harold Washington election, it was something like 82% turnout in Chicago because it was truly a people's mobilization versus the Mamdani election. I don't remember the exact turnout numbers, but I think it was far below 82%. And, as we've discussed, it was immigrants and NGOs and other types of organizations. And so you can kind of see the decline of progressive politics and even what's possible in the Democratic Party since the 1980s by comparing the two.
Okay, maybe I can read some of the comments from the stream before we transition. People in general, I think, really appreciated Magda's article. Nathan Reddy, Sterling Johnson, Roots and Bark said, "Good morning, where can we find this article?" Neha said, "Good morning." Someone whose username is Caterpillar's End said, "Brilliant, thank you for sharing this. This is great insight. The term evil is inflammatory, but we should call it what it is." And then, I just said that this is very alarming and then really appreciated the article. Nathan said, "Indian Americans largely weren't descended from freedom fighters, but took advantage of Nehru's post-independence educational initiatives.
Yeah.
Then abandoned Indira Gandhi and reaped what black people sowed. And saying that they're successful is a statement of values, depending on what success actually means." Says there's some complexity in that while immigrants harbor, actual immigrants harbor anti-black racism, their children claim to be anti-racist, but only so that they can get a high-profile job. Let's see. Roots and Bark said, "This is one of the few places that can have this conversation responsibly and with full context. I love all you beautiful people." Bombalai said, "Trump is giving racists and degenerates the courage to show their true colors. After all that, he got elected and voted in a second time. White people's response to immigration might be a gigantic inferiority complex gone awry." Roots and Bark said, "Whiteness thrives on boxes and bosses, separation and hierarchy." Patrick O'Hara said, "They hate all the colored people, and by preferring one over the other, causes them to have issues against each other instead of uniting against them as a collective." Bombalai says, "As a child growing up in the USA, you learn fast that racism is everywhere. You had to learn to live with it." Those are the comments.
Yeah. First, I just wanted to say that the Mamdani election had a turnout of 43%. I just looked it up, and that's that's almost half of what the turnout was for Harold Washington's. So that should give you an idea about the popularity angle that is front and center in the case of Mamdani. I also wanted to say that I really appreciate Meghna for writing this article and putting back the question of struggle on the table. The point should not be to escape struggle, escape sacrifice, but to actually embrace it in a revolutionary way like Meghna was talking about. Because I think I agree with Jeremiah when even I've heard that from my parents, who probably heard it from their parents, who probably heard it from their parents, that I am working hard and sacrificing so that you don't have to do it. But then they end up doing it anyway, but in a more self-serving way for their generational line. I think this article on immigration also ties very deeply with the article that I wrote on the Epstein files, because the people who populate these universities across America, guess what? They're all immigrants. At UPenn, 70% of the postdoc and research associate population are immigrants. They're on visas. And that should give you, that's just how I wanted to start talking about my article. I think that this issue was very well thought out, where everything sort of ties into each other. And it ties into King's triple evils and trying to expose this crisis in Western civilization. And that's also what my article tries to do. It tries to expose a crisis which is not a crisis about resources or finances or the economy. It is a crisis of legitimacy. It is a crisis of moral authority, and I think the reason why we had decided to include this article on the Epstein files is because of an observation that I think initially Doc had made, which is if you look at the Epstein files, the number one category of people who are mentioned in the Epstein files are financiers and Wall Street bankers and people like that. But the second most populous category are academics. And that should have been an alarm bell in itself. You know, the Epstein files were kept secret from the public for about 7 years. I think Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide in 2019, I think. And there has been a lot of debate about releasing these files. We still don't know what is in these files in its entirety. We don't know what the redactions contain. We don't know what the other 3 million files contain. So there is still this secrecy that the state has maintained on these files. But from what we have gotten from these files, we were able to discern, and I credit Doc for this, is that this was not about one person. This was not about one man. This was not about his proclivities or, you know, his interest in trafficking women and children and, you know, all the sex trafficking and the island. It was not primarily about that. I think I try to make that argument in the article, but that it was about a network. It was about this transcontinental network which involved Jeffrey Epstein as a node in a very large network of academics, financiers, philanthropists. So every single arm of the state that we have discussed in the past, which is the military, the economic institutions, and academia, all of them are involved in this large network with Epstein very close to the center, or if not the center. And I still think that a lot needs to be dug through in these files, but from what we have managed to sort of excavate is that this was a very, very large project which spanned decades about trying to prove the inferiority of black people in America. It was about the rebirth of eugenics, and eugenics was founded, or coined at least, in 1883 by Charles Darwin's cousin, Francis Galton. And this eugenics category, the entire science of eugenics, was, and many people tend to believe that this was what led Hitler to exterminate the Jews, and that was their moral foundation for the Nazi Holocaust. But it is also fact that eugenics actually was developed in its infancy in the United States. You had eugenics research, you had eugenics foundations and institutions start in the United States very soon after 1883. And that ideology is what Hitler saw and really liked, and he got that from here, from America. And so I think that the purpose, as I was saying, of writing this entire essay was to expose this very critical crisis of Western civilization, the crisis of legitimacy and moral authority, which the ruling elite has completely lost at this point. I think that in writing this, I was also very intent on not making this only a critique. I wanted this to also be as Samir said, like a bridge. I wanted this to be a bridge between the people who will read this article. Everybody who believed in the science that the Epstein files contains, and it runs deep. It's in every single top tier institution that you can think of. Think Harvard, think MIT, think Stanford, think Columbia. All of these household names, all of them had scientists who were part of this Epstein eugenics network, and they were trying to prove with the veneer that science is neutral and science only tells you what is true. But underneath it all, their explicit effort was asserting that black people are inferior. And my effort has been to make the people who read this cross that bridge and come into the understanding that this science was weaponized to inhibit and dampen the potential that exists in every single person. I remember that Blaze and I were reading Dark Princess, and in the last chapter when the princess and Matthew reconnect, the princess tells Matthew that, you know, when we first met, you said something which is the reason why my entire life changed, which is you said that every man is the best of men, if not for the poverty and ignorance that plagues them. Every man has the potential in them to be the best of men. And I think I took that really seriously in also trying to form my arguments in this article, where I was trying to tell people who read this article that you are the best of men. I do want to say that when I was beginning to write this article, and I was thinking about, who is this article really meant for? I think that I was very limited, and I was thinking, I wish that my colleagues can read this, other academics can read this, and they can see what they are a part of. That was what I was thinking, and then I remembered this conversation with Jahan, who heard me and said, well, think about an NOI brother reading this. And I think that completely changed the way I thought, and I credit Jahan completely for talking to me through this process. Or a child reading this, or a working class man reading this. And I feel like that's who I wrote this for, somebody who can read this and really understand that it's not in the science, because I'm a scientist and I work at UPenn, and I do believe that the science that is being done at UPenn is not great. It's not for humanity, it's purely self-serving. But I still haven't lost faith in science in itself. And that's what I also wanted to come out and say, that don't lose faith in science, don't lose faith in the scientific process, but understand that this has been weaponized against you. And I feel like the writing process was long and difficult, and there were a lot of different versions, and I have to thank Nuri a lot for her continued and very patient guidance through this process. But at the end, what I wanted to kind of get at is that these institutions that have claimed to represent the truth have been exposed as captured institutions by the state who have a very particular agenda, which is to undermine democracy. If you can prove that there are some people who are who are inferior than other people, then the entire concept of democracy is moot. Because why would you want somebody who's less intelligent to vote? th- it sort of shifts the entire framework away from having everybody's voice heard to only a select few people being heard. And those are obviously these rich, white, educated people who go to top tier institutions. And so this entire project that has been sort of it's in a lot of pieces in the Epstein files. A lot of different people have contributed to it, but this entire project has been, I think, an effort to one, pull back the gains of the civil rights movement and to undermine democracy in its entirety. Because if you look at what is happening in Gaza, every single university in Gaza has been destroyed. You cannot call yourself a scientist in the pursuit of truth and say that, oh well, that doesn't affect me, so just keep on giving me the funding and I will cure cancer or something. You know, there is that contradiction that just doesn't make sense in somebody who wants to be a moral human being. There are people dying, but you are saying, oh, that's nothing. Can I get some money so that I can cure Alzheimer's or shit? Sorry. The crisis is very clearly visible in the return of eugenics. I think that in my article, I kind of go through a kind of chronology, a kind of history of the development of eugenics through after the period of Reconstruction, through the 20th century, how it sort of picked back up during the Cold War era, and how the freedom movement was an active enemy of the eugenics movement rising. But then during that period of counter-revolution after King's assassination, you could actually see that without that moral voice of Martin Luther King, the eugenics agenda revamped and rose again. And now the same ideology that justified the slave trade is now being repackaged into different disciplines like evolutionary biology, population genetics, evolutionary psychology,
neuroscience,
and all of the, and you can see
genetic science,
genetics as a whole.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. But you can see, if you look at the Epstein files and the scientists in the Epstein files, there are two categories. One is this category of evolutionary biology, psychology, genetics, and then the others are physicists. These are the only two groups of people who populate the majority of the Epstein files in the academics section. And it is something to come out and say that all of these disciplines that have been put forward as, you know, career defining for a lot of students, very deep down, they are trying to pursue a eugenic agenda. The language might have changed, the way that they frame it might have changed, but at the end of the day, you can say inferiority of black people, or you can say that, assessment of intelligence in various subspecies of mammals. You know, like you can sort of hide it in the jargon, but it means the same thing. But the ruling class, I feel like, has lost its moral authority. It tried really hard to hold on through science, but now ultimately the mask has slipped off. And I think that in the end, I try to make a kind of case that the task right now, the task of a people's movement in today's time, is to obviously, it's a movement of consciousness. It has to be a movement of consciousness. The task has to be to build institutions that will produce the knowledge that the people need to liberate themselves. And the task is to, continue the Black freedom movement, because we are the inheritors of the Black freedom movement. We are the inheritors of a tradition of resistance. We are also the inheritors of Reconstruction. The task is to bring that forward into the 21st century and adapt it to all of these new forms of propaganda and control and language and all of that. So I feel like this article kind of started with Doc kind of clocking this observation, which the media tried really hard to sort of bury, because you will see a lot of articles about the sex trafficking and the child molesting. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to minimize that at all. Those are heinous, absolutely perverse things, and they are also morally wrong. But it is important to see what is hidden beneath the surface. What is the media not sensationalizing? And I think that there is enough evidence in the Epstein files to say that this was their agenda. Epstein funneled millions of dollars into these programs for dynamic biology and evolutionary theory and all of these things. Millions every year, and we still don't know what he did. He was himself a man shrouded in mystery. And that is also something that the media doesn't really seem to want to find out either. And I think I've also tried to make a very explicit connection between Jeffrey Epstein and Israel. I have tried to document his connections to the Israeli state, which, are available in little bits and pieces everywhere, like his relationship to Ghislaine Maxwell, whose father was supposed to be an Israeli Mossad spy, and all the conversations that he had with Larry Johnson, which the Mossad later came and debriefed about. So there is this whole network that extends from America to Israel, and you must have heard, to England and the UK, to Australia, to Sweden, to Norway, everywhere. The people that I have mentioned, it's not an exhaustive list. There are many more. There are many more people in the shadows. And I think that, there's a lot more research still to be done on those files. But this Israel connection is very important, because I feel like it is the reason why universities across the United States was able to witness a genocide and then prevent its own students from protesting the genocide.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, let its professors who were part of the Epstein files, took money from Epstein's, went on the island to roam free. This dichotomy between the treatment of the student encampment protesters and the people who are actually doing something immoral in the name of science is very stark. And that's what I have tried to portray. But, yeah.
I have you don't mind if I just... I'm trying to figure out how population genetics fits into eugenics, because my understanding of the main thrust of population genetics is that it goes so much against the eugenicist racist theory, especially the landmark study by Luigi Cavalli Sforza and two other Italian researchers entitled The History and Geography of Human Genes. It goes in the complete opposite way. So do you know how they try to appropriate population genetics to this?
Well, I think there are two ways.
And that could go for you too, Nuri, if you have that.
I can sort of think of two things immediately, and Nuri can add to this. But one of the ways that population itself as a category is weaponized is from this idea that, poor, uneducated people reproduce more. And this has been a kind of long-standing argument in the field of eugenics. And even in the files, they have sort of mentioned that we have to use genetic methods to sort of curb the population of black people who are reproducing too much, because they are going to sort of dilute.
Let me just interrupt you. But that's not population genetics.
No,
that's. You know what population genetics are.
Right. I was trying to explain the population part, but the population genetics part, which is to study the genetic makeup of an entire population.
Of the world.
Of the world, right?
The genetic, if you don't mind, just the genetics, what are the genes, and how have genes spread throughout human populations,
So, I think that this study about population genetics, how genes in a particular set in a population, how they depict behavior, like phenotypic behavior. That's not what you're talking about?
No. See, if you don't mind me interrupting, and Nuri, correct me if I'm wrong, what this landmark study, which reshaped the whole question of genes and population, showed that there are two major genetic variations in the human population. The original gene, human gene, that led to anatomically modern human beings is the African gene. And the variation upon that, which we call the Asian gene. There is no European genetic population. What the study showed, and this is the bombshell that was dropped, is that European populations overall tend to be 35% African genes and 65% Asian genes. There is no European gene. They're only the African original human gene and a variation upon it, which is the Asian gene. And so I'm trying to figure out, and maybe no one knows, how do you take population genetics and apply it to a eugenics program that begins with the concept of a white or European gene? You did where I'm coming from there.
Yeah, but I think part of the core of the problem, which I think comes out of Reconstruction and even how Du Bois describes the problem of science with the overthrow of Reconstruction, is that, like, even Reconstruction as an example basically proves that there is no such thing as white supremacy like that. But the ruling elite is not satisfied with the truth. Like, their conception of science is not actually based on what is true scientifically. And so I feel like part of the project is to create a science of white supremacy.
That's what I'm saying.
That's not true.
And this study in the mid-90s kind of blew that out of the water.
I think there's a lot of evidence, like there's plenty of scientific evidence that I think proves that there is no such thing as like a white race. But I feel like a lot of population genetics is still invested in basically like understanding the inheritance of like what they call the inheritance of complex traits. And so these complex traits are traits like intelligence or like socialization, like things like that.
Right.
And so I feel like a lot of population genetics is basically like, some of the most egregious cases are, they'll basically do like a genome-wide association study, which is where you have a bunch of like diverse human genomes, and then you look for an association with the traits that you're looking for, and then basically try to find like, oh, these are the genetic hits that align with like so-called intelligence. But I feel like in general, the population genetics, the fact that it has racist and eugenic elements, yes, it's in contradiction to a lot of the actual science, but I feel like part of it is that the science is so ideologically motivated.
That's right. And that's the thing. Oh, go ahead, officer.
No, I just wanted to mention that one of the things that population genetics does use to actually ideologically veer it into the realm of white supremacy is the concept of mutations, where you can have an African gene pool and you can have an Asian gene pool, but there are mutations that can occur. Even within that, there are mutations that can occur that can sort of take the gene pool, the genetic drift away from Africanness into a whole new category, which is why there's a mention of an Ashkenazi mutation in one of the files.
But I feel like more broadly, I think the most important thing is that this whole conception of science is to say that there's like a code or something that can be unlocked that then gives some people basically like the power to control like the destiny of the world. And I feel like there's this idea that basically it's encoded in genes, which is to say that there is no such thing as like human agency or like the environment or the society that we live in, but rather it's all just like from birth, predetermined. And so there's no point in like human struggle. There's no point in like revolutionary consciousness. There's no point even in like capacity or human agency. And so I feel like in some ways, I feel like this article is a good foil to like the sociology study that we're actually trying to undertake. Because I feel like in some ways we know that ideas and the ideological struggle is an important battleground. And we believe that knowledge actually is important to like human freedom and liberation. But then basically I feel like the eugenics, like white supremacist science, is this thing of like, oh, if we just invent the right technology or if we know like specific facts, then that's all we need to know and we can basically control society. Whereas I feel like the Du Boisian science is how do you actually study human capacity without like setting a ceiling for it, without like predetermining that these are the limits of human capacity. But how do you actually develop a science that does justice to the human being? And like even this thing of like law and chance, where I feel like what he's saying is that, yeah, like you might be able to detect certain patterns, but we can never set like a ceiling on what the limits of human possibility are. And I feel like in some ways the whole point of the eugenics or the white science is to say these are the exact limits, and therefore we can control what like human beings will do, and we can predict predictably that like human beings can only do so much, or that human beings are predisposed to like do certain things. And I feel like it's very hubristic. Like I feel like it's a very like egotistical science to assume that you know everything about a person just by like sequencing their genes and like seeing the proteins that they have in their genome.
Well, I also wanted to say that part of what I feel is very illuminating about the article is that it draws attention to how much the constitution of what we call the ruling elite in this country, but even more like internationally, how much of it is composed of and close to the universities and to scientists themselves. And if you, this is something we talked about in the Lucian Blackwell reading group recently, but if you look at the city of Philadelphia, it's like, it's not an abstract thing to think about what role the University of Pennsylvania, for example, plays in the city as part of not just an institution, but literally part of the ruling class of the city of Philadelphia, the people who control the destiny, one part of the network of people who literally control the destiny of the city and are part of who dictates which parts of the city are invested in, which parts are not, which help to dictate which schools are invested in, which ones are not, which schools are going to be closed and which ones are not. And baked into that, whether it's explicit or implicit, is the assumption that, like we said, that, for instance, black children are assumed to be not worthy of all of this. And it's so wrapped up in this idea of quote-unquote intelligence and capacity, and whether or not they're explicitly professing a eugenicist framework. Like no one in the government of Philadelphia will say we are eugenicists. Like that's not how it works. But it's like, regardless of that, I think what Shantanu is pointing out is that there are these assumptions that have emerged and developed over time. And I think part of what I think is actually important about Epstein is actually recognizing how dumb he was, honestly, like, and how unintelligent he was, and like, because like, even part of it was like, why does he have all these like typos in his emails? Some of which may be because of the way that the transcription was made, but I think other parts of it was just that like, yeah, when you strip it down, even if they're purporting to create the quote-unquote scientific framework about intelligence, about heritability, whatever it is, Epstein claiming to be an expert in quantum physics and all that stuff. It's like, at the end of the day, he's pretty stupid. And I think it kind of exposes how, like, the project of trying to maintain the ideological and intellectual justification for white supremacy is at its core not as even like a scientifically valid project. And it doesn't actually require these quote-unquote super geniuses, but it's more that you have to create the illusion of these super geniuses, these hyper-intelligent people.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
And you must have the institutional framework.
Yes, right.
Which means the universities.
Right.
And the top universities and research centers like the Edge Foundation.
Right.
You need these, this is very, I'm sorry.
No, yeah, I agree.
Because you had mentioned like I guess what coming out of our conversation with Lucian Blackwell, and looking at Philadelphia and looking at UPenn, like you had mentioned the schools and which schools are open, which schools are closed, which means like such important consequences for Black children. But the other thing I was going to add that made me think of is like, what kind of jobs do Black people deserve to have or don't deserve to have? Going into our conversations around deindustrialization, like this is what I mean. That we were going in this conversation we've been in this conversation for a long time around the knowledge economy and like. Therefore, service work, but then taking out so much of the fact and saying that the 21st century economy of like a city like Philadelphia or a country like America has to rest not upon like a robust Black proletariat, but the most weakened form of the kinds of jobs available for the Black proletariat, which is in the service economy. But then the only jobs created in a city like this are going to primarily be for universities, in hospitals, but which we've also talked a lot about, or in universities. Right. Like that also has all these spillover consequences for things like gentrification of a city like Philadelphia. Right. And I think, that in itself was what was in the back of my mind when we were talking about Mamdani, like not to go back to a previous part of our conversation, but those connections between even like the young people that may also then come to a city like Philadelphia, be drawn to candidates like the Democratic Socialists. Right.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And I feel like it does tie in with a lot of what Megna's research has been on, which is like the whole question of how, like, what is it that shapes the social structure and inequality of like a city like Philadelphia or Chicago part of it is the continuation of the color line and of racial segregation, but overlaid onto it increasingly has become this question of education. And if you look at the governance strategies of all of the major cities in America, the people that they want to live in their cities are the highly educated. And that is like who they envision to be their ideal citizen in many ways, and their ideal tax base. And that is almost like the prototype of who they picture to be the person that they want to live to move to the city of Philadelphia. And it's like, I do think that like basically the education question has become part of what has exacerbated the existing framework of white supremacy increasingly. And you can see it a lot in terms of even the research that Megna has done about like opportunity and which jobs are prioritized, like which kinds of jobs, which kinds of industries. And a lot of it is, like what Kathy has called or identified as like the knowledge economy.
I had a question.
Speak up.
Okay. So my question is for Shantanu is, pertaining to what it signifies to study any population that we could say definitively would be defined by being prisoners of war. So I think that you've done a good job, and I'm very eager to sit with this more, of comparing side by side why the eugenics movement arose from America to not only contain but study the effects of slavery on African Americans who were forcibly trafficked, tortured, raped, and surviving an experience that definitively we would say is an experience of being a prisoner of war in a constant state of survival of the one who trafficked you, in a constant state of torture, in a constant state of intimidation, and also being in a location where you have no solidarity or a foothold to either retreat or to establish permanence. And I think that comparing this side by side with what has happened to Palestine is very provocative in a powerful way, because what I'm trying to verbalize is that what you've done is compare side by side to say, really what we're looking at is what happens when certain scientists might be compelled with money, if they're not getting enough money from foundations to fund their laboratories. Epstein basically bribed people to champion his worldview, which is not based in science, and his worldview is motivated by the intentions of the settlement, which is to not only track but harass and torture the prisoners of war. So whether we're talking about Palestine or we're talking about this long-term containment strategy occurring in the United States, which has been spanning for hundreds of years at this point, you instead of bringing in the scientists to triage and to utilize science to identify the effects and the costs of surviving something so horrid, to survive a horror, instead of empowering science to do something like observe, which is the basis of science, scientists are instead compelled to break apart and thoroughly degrade and humiliate and bludgeon the prisoners of war, which is the elimination strategy of any settlement that intends to eradicate all evidence of their criminal intent. That's how I feel. And I think that this is really what you've mapped out. It's pretty significant. So, but for you as a scientist, I'm wondering how you're thinking, because at the end of the day, even if we're talking about population science, it's really statistics. Like, I don't know, I don't mean to be pushy, but it's so I always take a step back and then I wonder about the significance of anything being said, because I'm just like, it's just the way that you're spatializing the data, and a community mom can just sit down and observe more than you because she's listening, right? So much of what's being statistics is kind of being used to bludgeon and to say that the way that the data is spatialized and given weight is a fact, and the people on the ground who know what they're surviving, who know what's being taken from them, who know that they're being tortured, or somehow voiceless or not practicing some form of street science in and of itself. I saw in the West Bank that street scientists identified chemical weapons of mass destruction and observed their effects on female reproduction. Right? That's something that we haven't even articulated yet. Like the chemicals being dispersed not only cause miscarriage but cause life-term effects on birth or the ability to start a household. But rather than empower, again, the community to observe, we often will empower the predator to further destroy and derail and sabotage. Or at least this is where I'm feeling that you're coming from and what you've been able to demonstrate. So if you have anything to say on maybe that context or frame of prisoner of war as a commonality point, I would hope, yeah, I'm just throwing that out there.
No, I think you've raised a very important point. I feel like what I've tried to also say is that this entire ideological project has been targeted towards black people in history, and you're right, it is now being utilized in a more global context now against the Gazan people, against the Iranian people. Science has been misutilized this way. However, earlier, and this is a discussion that Jahan and I had, which is that earlier, whereas the intent was to subjugate, to keep imprisoned, and to somehow break down and utilize for your own means, now it has sort of become far more extreme. Now it's just kill them all. Now it's drop bombs on people. You know, whichever race of people that the science concludes is not deserving of life, are now being exterminated. And it is the same science that is backing all of these military defense systems, and I feel like I have reason to believe that that's why physics was also like targeted, like that area of physics, theoretical physics, but theoretical physics leads to a lot of development in AI systems and weapon manufacturing and everything. Like all of these guidance systems, it's all theoretical physics. And so the ideology has remained consistent. I would kind of agree with you. The impact and the method of execution has become far more extreme in today's time. And I think I like what you said about how, you know, you went to the West Bank and you saw like very open evidence of these weapons of chemical destruction being utilized against the people. And that is also something that I feel like happens even here, that the lived experiences of people are ignored. The lived experiences of the working people are not given too much weight because, oh, look at these scientists, they're doing sociology in their high towers, and they're going to find out what is wrong with society and give us instruction on how to fix it. And what has it led to? It has led to deindustrialization, it has led to criminalization. All of these things are also backed by social science. And like Jeremiah was saying, that there is a science behind which schools are going to be closed. There's an ideology behind that as well. And so I feel like science has been sort of just, it's been really, really co-opted by the ruling elite. And if you see the science that Du Bois did in the Philadelphia Negro, what we were talking about, or the science that he did in Souls of Black Folk, and actually studying a population, but what you were saying about how to study how these people live, that's what Du Bois did, and we need that today. We need that dedication to humanity. We need that dedication to actually see a family live freely, you know. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Yeah, I just to reinforce the point, what I saw that you wrote was that Epstein was targeting Harvard professors that were tenured, and it's outrageous and ironic to sit with that. You know, my sensei is trained in has a doctorate in community psychology from Harvard, and you know, what he taught me was to listen and to observe and to actually be really, to be more like, to become more like Sensei is to be really quiet, really observant, and to abide by a totally different type of worldview. And you know, community psychology at Harvard had the capacity to empower his practice, and yet that person had to fight to have a place at Harvard, to have a place in Silicon Valley where I met him. And so you see a figure like Epstein coming in and manipulating the ones who are given tenured and allowed to represent the meaning and significance of science. I just want to applaud you for taking note of that, and also, well, why would they even be willing to entertain some random man with who's not even on their level? He just simply had money.
Right.
And I guess I just wanted to say is that I don't think that these people were manipulated. I think that they were very willing participants. They gave him access. He was convicted in 2008 of child trafficking. And no matter what Noam Chomsky says or anybody says, you can't just say 20 years later, not 20 years later, but 15 years later, that I didn't know about his conviction.
If you didn't know, then you're an idiot. Like, you should not be a professor.
Yeah, exactly. You claim to be a...
No, like, your job is to know things.
Literally, your job is to know things.
You branded yourself as this.
And that is a very flimsy excuse for saying that, oh yeah, after the 2008 conviction, I still associated with Jeffrey Epstein, went on the island, participated in conferences that he organized. And you know, like this allure of these Ivy League top-tier institutions is massive. Everybody sees that stamp and they think that it's legit. And nothing wrong can ever come out of it. Whereas you have, this is an aside, but you have evidence that Harvard has the maximum number of retractions in papers every year. In America, in a particular field and everything, but it's still true, you know. But I think that these people who were approached by Epstein had something to gain, and that's why they willfully participated in it. And what?
Can I ask you a question? Weren't they already captured?
Yes.
Didn't it take being captured to rise in the academic hierarchy? You had to be committed ideologically.
That is true. And I feel like that's part of the process of like being in these universities, like we've said, and like the science conferences and stuff. You're not just learning like how to do statistics or how to do science. You're being socialized into a more comprehensive worldview, which says like, oh, because I'm getting this training, which is not just the training to like do science, but the training to navigate this institution. I get the cred to tell myself that I belong here and I deserve to be in whatever position of power I land in after this. And the way that people are doing things here is the right way to do things. Because otherwise, why am I here? If it's the wrong way to do things, why is everybody hyping this place up? And I feel like the thing though is that the article is really important to, I think expose like the deep rot. And for young people who I think are trying to figure out like, why am I here? What am I doing? And to say like, okay, like this is the price of the ticket. And I feel like one example is that basically the Epstein files, like they do implicate like almost every famous person in academia. Like I'll just say like at Penn, all of the people who do like mathematical biology or like ecological evolutionary modeling, all of them are at most 2 degrees of separation from Epstein. Like the most prominent professors, like they did postdocs or they were co-advised by Martin Nowak. And then also like, what's his name? His last name's Levin, but he's at Princeton and he's like a really famous ecologist.
Which one is this now?
His name's Levin. Simon Levin?
Simon.
And so he emailed with Epstein and he's like in the files. And yeah, like the thing is that like if you like all of us like interact with these people, and it was so interesting because some of the undergrads that I know, they had a negative interaction with like basically their stats professor who made them feel really stupid. And so they were like, what's up with this guy? And they like looked him up and they're like, wait, he's in the Epstein files. And they're like, oh my God, like, well, okay, he's not directly in the Epstein files, but they went so far because they were like so sure that something was not right that then they dug up like the second, third degree connection and they're like, oh my God. And then they were also like, oh my God, like this professor he lists conflicts of interest on his publications because he's working with the Department of Defense and the State Department. And he was like, the fact that like that's the world that you're living in, I think really shook them. But like, imagine if like they didn't have like even the Epstein files to refer to, and they're just like, oh, like maybe the stats professor treated me this way because I'm stupid, or because like I don't know stats and I should try to be more like him. And I feel like that is basically like the daily experience of like basically any young person in these institutions, which is like either you pledge loyalty and try to become more like these people in order to rise or to accept it, or you reject it and then you're like cast out.
Yeah. And then you're considered a failure.
Yeah.
You're considered what?
A failure.
Yeah, you're cast out of science, you know, like because this community is so gate kept that once you're cast out, you can't find your way back in unless the same people who cast you out take you back in. And so we have access to my advisor's Google Calendar. And I think 3 weeks ago, I saw that she had a 2-hour meeting with this guy, and I sort of recognized the name on it, or I felt that it was just familiar, and I was like, where have I seen this name before? Man's in the Epstein files. And it's really something if you think about it. If your advisor is 1 degree of separation away from Epstein, or 2 degrees of separation away from Epstein.
Or half a degree.
Or half a degree, and then you go 1 more degree, and there's Israel.
And there's Israel.
You know, so this network analysis, I feel like was really important for us to do to actually get this point across, like how close you may think you are to the state of Israel is not really...
and the genocide.
Yeah, and the genocide.
Yes.
Right. If I come in, I think that on this point of networks, I think it's very important the fact that this article talks about Chomsky, and I think it's related to our discussion earlier about progressive politics as well, because the entire U.S. left is essentially 1 degree of separation or less from Chomsky, which puts them 1 degree of separation from Epstein, from Israel itself. And I don't think you can disconnect the rise of a Mamdani figure, or honestly even the DSA or whatever left exists. They're all connected in one way or the other to Chomsky, although I'm sure some are distancing themselves now. And so it was just very revealing to me how much control the state apparatus has over even lefts and progressives, because it's not just the financial side alone, although that is part of it, but it's the kind of ideological control that a figure like Chomsky has and the sort of agenda that he's serving. And I also wanted to say that I think that it's significant that the periodization that this article talks about, because to start with Reconstruction, I think is significant. You know, we have just read, we're just finishing actually Black Reconstruction in our reading group, and just reading the chapter on the founding of the public school and then back towards slavery, it establishes how Black people, I think, were basically the first people among darker humanity who really strove for education, for ideas, and for science, for democratic purposes, and were basically challenging the monopoly of whites on science and modern ideas. But that was completely interrupted and overthrown with the overthrow of Reconstruction. And the fact that eugenics basically was there to reconsolidate this white control over science, and the fact that white supremacy could rule through science. But I think the shift that Shantanu had mentioned, which it's also my hypothesis, from more of an emphasis of white supremacy on subjugation of darker people and to use their labor a shift from that towards all-out elimination, like we're seeing in Palestine, or even like we were discussing with criminalization of black people, is essentially a attempt at elimination. I think that shift is also very motivated by the fact that white supremacy has started to lose its monopoly over science with the rise of darker humanity in the 20th century, with the rise of a figure like Du Bois, who's basically trying to waging a huge challenge to white supremacy's control over science, and of course the ideas coming out of Asia and Africa and so on. And then in our times, even more so with the rise of the darker nations, with China being able to challenge the West on AI and all of this stuff, and even Iran as well. All of that has motivated them to turn towards this kind of new reconsolidation. But I think this, as this article establishes, this new attempt at reconsolidation, they're forced to basically move into pseudoscience, whether it's eugenics, which goes against the actual scientific results and studies of population genetics, or it's string theory, as we've discussed previously. All of that shows that the West is increasingly losing any connection to real science, moving towards basically barbarism and pseudoscience. And so that kind of sets the stage for darker humanity to claim the mantle of science and ideas for more democratic purposes.
Can I just say something apropos, and this is very apropos, our trip to India, which, we meet on Fridays, and suddenly it occurred to me, maybe others had already come to this conclusion, that this trip is taking on profound ideological meaning for the very reason that, and you're talking now about network analysis, Indian professors from elite American universities almost seem to have dual appointments in Indian universities of high prestige, such as JNU. And the way, and Meghna and Joe, you know this from Friday's meeting, and Alice, it like descended upon me like a ton of bricks. Oh, shit. We're going over there to enter into ideological struggle over what? Du Bois and the black tradition of ideas. And it's not abstract. It is actually occurring at a university where we're going to be going to, JNU. And these two professors, Indians, who also teach at Columbia University, which is also one of the universities that has this research center in evolutionary biology, and the head of it was found to be in intimate contact with Jeffrey, and you bring it out in the article. But these two Indians who are going after Du Bois, one in a hysterical and crazy way, Spivak, and the other in a more subtle way, when he reframes Du Bois for the, so, the assumption, at least in India, that the universities in the formerly colonized nations are freeing themselves from Western ideology and assumptions, I think, is wrong. And the second thing is the huge presence of Indian mathematicians and theoretical physicists doing string theory. The two places were the United States and India. Maybe Israel was somewhere in there. But I think we have to look more critically at what is going on in the universities, even in China. Because at this point, I don't have any evidence that Chinese scholars are doing work in social science that challenges the assumptions of eugenics, of scientific racism. And one piece of evidence, when this landmark study in population genetics came out, the place, at least the way it appeared to me, the place with theories of multigenesis, in other words, every race had its own origins. So there's a Chinese genetic history, there's a European genetic history, there's an African genetic, not a single genetic history of humanity. I don't know how much that is still in the Chinese scientific thinking. Yeah, so definitely India. You can't take anything for granted going to India, and this brief and framing in a way that's painful to even hear of the black struggle and the history of ideas among black people to show or to interpret all of this black history, ideological history, in ways that support a white supremacist framing of things. So we were talking about this on Friday as we prepare for this trip, and it's a huge, I didn't have an idea until Friday of how contentious and how combative and how prepared we must be to go to these Indian universities where we will be expressing ideas that are outside maybe of the elite consensus in India.
Or against the elite consensus.
So we would be challenging the elite consensus, especially on Du Bois, but maybe more, of course.
We have like an hour left, I know.
Well,
okay.
I can use that to transition.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think one of the other pieces in the Avant-Garde issue is we did an interview with Doc, which was last October, actually, but it's finally been published for print this July. So it's been a long process. And I don't know how we did it, but it was a very big team effort. And I feel like we started the interview because we were doing your 80th birthday celebration. And I feel like we took that as an opportunity to basically reflect on your life, and through that, I think, to recognize your role in the political and ideological struggle. And in a lot of ways, I think that also helped clarify our own groundwork as free school, like what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we do it. And I think some of it is that we inherit both the tradition of the Black freedom struggle, but also an understanding of politics in the city and in the country and in the world. Yes, and the world communist movement through you. And so I think part of it was through that interview, we understood the development of your consciousness through the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, even the Great Migration to a city like Philadelphia. But I think one of the big highlights was in some ways the rise of the world communist movement and the critical role of Henry Winston in basically understanding what is the democratic struggle, what is the revolutionary struggle in America, and why are Black people central to any understanding of democracy in this country. That was one. But then two, even after the fall of the Soviet Union and basically this rise of a counter-revolutionary era, which was big in the 80s, the 90s. And with the collapse, I think one of the things that is really important is that you were talking about and investigating and studying Du Bois, basically for the last 30 years. And I feel that is really important to understanding where we are today, where basically with the sociology study, I feel part of what I feel is oh, we're so right. We're really vindicated. And I think seeing what taking Du Bois seriously can actually like produce, and that it can produce something new for the 21st century. Something that is new but is actually like appropriate and reflects like the reality of the people. But then also like Du Bois, not just as an American thinker, but as like a world historic thinker for the world. And I feel like in the context of the India trip, I think it is important because Du Bois is not best understood by, like an Indian American intellectual like Gayatri Spivak. But I feel like it is best understood like bone of the bone, flesh of the flesh, like you in Philadelphia. And I just feel like that is important to give to the world. But I think also like for the issue, I mean, even though I feel like you share your life with us like all the time, like tell us all the stories, I feel like we all like learned a lot about the details. And I think like the texture of your life, the many things that changed, but basically the principles that you stuck to, I feel like mean a lot. And yeah, like we did like 4 sessions of interviews with you at your house for like multiple hours each, and it was like 70 pages of transcript. No, it was like over 100. It was like almost like 200 pages of transcripts.
Yeah.
And I feel like we all read it and like transcribed it and copy edited it. No, we did.
No, I mean, go ahead.
And I feel like all of that, like, I mean, I kind of was like too satisfied with just like the full output where I was like, oh, maybe we could just like put it all online. But I feel like Alice and Purva did a lot of work to actually consolidate it and condense it into an arc. Yeah, but I feel like in some ways for the last year, we've been trying to better understand like the counter-revolution of thought and of politics that comes after the Black freedom movement. And I feel like that's important to like our identity, like as a generation, or like to explain the crisis that the American people are in now. And I think a lot of the time, like it can feel like you don't have anything left because you've almost like, for young people, I feel like it's like we've been severed from King or like from the Black freedom movement. But I feel like in a lot of ways, you're the thread that has continued from that and has also tried to process it and synthesize it to give us something.
So I didn't die.
No, not just that you didn't die, but like you didn't abandon your post.
No, I didn't. I didn't get distracted on the way to grandmother's house. I didn't. But go ahead. I'm sorry. I interrupted you.
I think what Nuri said is that we had done these comprehensive interviews, which were, I guess, 100-something pages in transcript, but then they're also online. But specifically for this avant-garde issue, we had to narrow it down and figure out, like, the videos are already online, you can hear the full history, much of which we still have yet to uncover. But what do we want to say specifically for this issue of avant-garde? And I think a huge part of our audience for what we had narrowed down to was young people in this time who are interested in understanding the crisis, or not exactly put in those terms, like people may not express it in those terms, but young people trying to navigate this crisis, understand it, and find a way out. And what is so valuable about the interview is that it shows that there is merit to experience and to having lived through the various decades of struggle where you have the Vietnam War, you have the Black freedom movement, you have the civil rights movement in King, you have the World Communist Party. And because those experiences show that actually where you see Doc and the free school today is not a given. This emphasis on knowledge, this emphasis on the Black freedom struggle and King and Du Bois, and the confidence that the free school and Doc has towards that approach of revolutionary struggle was not a given, because Doc, in your experience, also shows that there are different ways or approaches that are offered to young people. And seeing your life and how you were drawn to certain strategies for freedom, but then also saw the inadequacies and how they had to continuously be developed, is a lesson for young people today to not repeat those same, or not repeat, but to assess what has been walked or what paths have been walked, and what works and doesn't work. Because I think that was what, I think oftentimes we see free school as, yeah, why is it that there is a confidence in King? Why is it that there is a confidence in the Black freedom movement? And it is in some ways your scientific assessment through your life. And specifically for this interview, we had followed your arc as a young child growing up in North Philadelphia of the Black social system and feeling oppression, or yes, feeling the oppression of society on Black folk, and knowing that you wanted to contribute to the uplift of Black folk, but you didn't have immediate answers. You were finding your way, navigating your way to Lincoln, and being surrounded by Black intellectuals and a Black political intellectual renaissance. And then I think making your way to Black revolutionary nationalism in terms of the 60s and the African liberation movements and African students that came to Lincoln, to then finding your way to the Communist Party in Winston. And I think oftentimes because of how confident you are in King and in the civil rights movement, it feels as if as that was happening, or it doesn't seem like, or because you talk about it so often, I think we forget that it's actually only after the fall of the Soviet Union in the 2000s where you're trying to figure a way where the World Communist Party has collapsed, the Soviet Union has collapsed, people are trying to figure out like, oh shoot, where do you go from here? That you had to return to King and return to Du Bois and return to Winston.
Right.
And I think that's what we were trying to capture in these excerpts of the interviews, this long interview process, which is what were the different trends that you had, or movements that you had been a part of, and how did you move forward as the world evolved, and as a lesson for us today to take forward. And I think that's the part that also stuck out too, as we were all figuring out, like, I think it definitely was a gap for us of the fall of the world communist movement and the Soviet Union, and how that really impacted revolutionaries or self-proclaimed or actual revolutionaries to the optimism that they felt about change in this country and this nation and the path forward. And yeah, I think I just hope that we captured that in in these selections, for both a better understanding of the tradition and history and the ideological development that free school is built upon, but also why it gives us a certain confidence too about the path forward for us.
I know, but this is, last evening, Emily and I cooked for Reverend Cavanaugh, and she came over to my house, and, it was really nice, kicking it with her. And I was getting confused with what generation I am in. I know I'm a baby boomer, but then I kept referring to myself as a millennial. So I'm like, I remember I was getting these generations confused because I'm so much around you all. And I have to be very honest. I think you all took me more seriously than I take myself. Really, Um, and you know, Cavaniz was talking about my wisdom, and I don't feel, I feel, and I was saying to her, I feel that I'm a part of a collective of people. And, you know, I have more experience, obviously. But I think, you know, Nuri, well, you know, we went over to NYU, and Nuri and I were working in one area. I know Eddie and Kathy were working in another area. I forget where you were, but we were working through different files. And I think it's that key moment with the collapse of the world communist movement where things did not just change for communist parties, but for the whole world movement for freedom. Everything changed. And I know Nuri and I are still trying to find certain documents, especially the 1989 ideological conference in the Communist Party, and then some of the essays. That was the key point. And I don't want to talk too much, yeah, I guess but that was the point at which, I mean, it's based upon that I concluded certain things about certain people who are very prominent today. For example, Angela Davis. Great woman, but at that point, she broke. She broke and would never be a revolutionary again. She abandoned the revolutionary struggle for social democracy and liberalism very openly. You know, I can see Gerald Horne and his theories of counter-revolution and all of that through the prism of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the world communist movement, where he throws in the towel. And his theories are fundamentally anti-revolutionary or non-revolutionary. He can't call himself a revolutionary. I could see, you know, I could make a judgment about the trajectory of Cornel West and many, many others. I even talk, I think, in one of them about Frank Chapman, you know, and his networks at this moment of crisis. And at the moment of crisis, the question of the world revolutionary movement, where were you? And I think that's what, you know, Nuri and I, we've been trying, and because outside of the facts, but where were you? And why were you where you were? And why was it that you didn't have a hell of a lot to say about anything? And I mean that. And I know, like I said, I think on one of them, that I felt compelled to go to the front of the struggle. I wasn't going to be silent. I wasn't going to be in the background. And it's documented. That's what Nuri and I, we go back over NYU and try to put these pieces together. But don't come up now talking all kind of trash when you were called upon to act and you didn't. And one of the things, and this is why Winston is so important and he keeps coming up, I said to myself, we must defend the party and its right to exist. Because see, what they were challenging, Gorbachev on down, was the right of communist parties to exist. And that's going to be a part of what we discuss when we go over to India. Because their communist party didn't go out of existence, the one here hasn't, but they transformed from revolutionary parties to social democratic and liberal parties. So, you know, let's kick it. Let's compare experiences. I was there, maybe some of y'all was there. The other question, and we talked about the factionalism. I think it was you, Nuri, or Purba. Y'all did when I looked at that shit, I said, God damn, the preparation that y'all did. You know, I mean, it was unbelievable. In fact, I think the questions and often were better than the answers. I do. I'm saying, damn, but Purba asked about factions in the party that go back to McCarthyism, and especially in California, and how that reappears in a subtle and unspoken opposition to Winston, especially on the question of the Southern African freedom movement and Winston's concept of Pan-Africanism as solidarity. All of these things. Now, I just happen, I don't know why. I mean, ask yourself, okay.
Oh no, just that Jahan and Meg have to leave, but I think they would.
Let me continue. Just in life, you don't know how it's going to turn out, but you try to act morally. And I thought, with Joe Slovo and Gorbachev and then all the illusions, we talked about that a bit, where they would think with people in the party, established people that I looked up to. If the Soviet Union, if the Soviet Party is doing this, yada, 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 yada. Well, the Soviet Party is wrong. Something is wrong here. Joe Slovo, the head of the South African, if Joe Slovo, well, he's wrong. Can he be wrong? And if he is wrong, then what do? And then this is where you get, and I'll just shut him in. See, like I tried to say, communist parties are not made up of just Marxist-Leninists, because communist parties are movements. You have social democrats, you have liberals, you got people that may have started as revolutionaries, they become something different. But they remain communists for all kinds of reasons, the peace movement and all of that type of thing. No problem. No problem. But then when those different positions become factions that divide the party, and then you hit a moment where there's a crisis of the world revolutionary movement. Who wins out? What wins out? That was the huge thing, I think. And therefore, like you said, for myself, then I'm thrown back. I'm hearing Winston and other black communists about Dr. Du Bois. That's all they talk, Dr. Du Bois, and thus my thinking, a new way. There is a way out. We don't have to surrender. We can fight, but we have to find the ideological basis of the fight. And that was the key. And it's really like today, the centrality of the ideological struggle. And you're always going to find, just from life, it's a life lesson. Whenever you stand up, there are going to be all kind of people who oppose you. It's easier to tear down people who stand up than to stand up. We see it coming through free school. And we're going to have to be more, I'll be at 100 about this, we're going to have to be more disciplined. Ain't everybody just coming in here saying what they want to say. We fight too hard. And anybody who thinks that this is just aimless, directionless conversation, they need to think again. This is more serious than that. But this idea that anytime people, well, we'll tear them down, that's easy. And it's always going to happen. Always. That's why most people don't stand up, because they're afraid of the attacks and so on. It's easy to be a coward. It's easy to be a coward. But if you want to be a coward, do your thing. Go to your local barber shop and argue, or beauty salon. Don't bring your cowardice, especially the young people, It's a huge, and that's, if I were to say, I know I'm preaching this year. If I were to say anything, and this don't make me nothing above y'all, because I don't feel that way one bit. I'm humbled to be a part of this. I am humbled. And anybody that doesn't appreciate that, stay away from free school. If you can't appreciate this, don't come up in here. We don't need you. We will be successful or fail based on what we do and how well we do what we do. But don't come around us. You understand where I'm coming from? Mm-hmm. But it was just, I guess, chance. I am not, and believe me, I am not all that. I am not that smart. It's all a hard, no, it's, you know, to lose jobs and shit, for a bum to go to the administration of Temple University and say to them, Montero, he called me Tony because he ain't no scholar, he's a communist apparatchik. And that bum to be respected by people I know in this city, I mean, you know what I'm saying? Okay, you took my gig. You took my ability to pay my mortgage. You took my ability to take care of my children, or help my children out. You took that cold-bloodedly. Okay? But I didn't die. I stayed on post. And there's still some black people that I got to settle accounts with. You know, like my brother, I'll keep it real with y'all, my brother Michael Cord. You know, why you down with that? Do you realize what Molefe Asante did? Now you call yourself so much of an angry black man and you fighting for the president's house and all, but dog, come on, you got to come and see me. We got to talk. You understand what I'm saying? That's the way, you know, I guess I'm saying it's very personal when you get attacked. Now, you know, sometimes that's why sometimes I have this kind of street way. You know, oh, you gonna raise your voice? I raise mine. You gonna step to my young people? Well, I'm gonna step to you. And I mean that. I mean it. And so, like Michael, well, you got to see me, money. We ain't finished with each other. You know what I'm saying? Why are you with that cat? You know what I'm saying? You claim to be a revolutionary, but you with him. You know, I got some other people. I mean, but my life ain't committed to getting revenge, but you got to see me. I'll tell you one last thing I didn't talk about. You know, when MOVE was rising up, when they were coming into existence, they made a thing out of attacking black organizations, including us in the Communist Party. And I remember, you know, we would be trying to have meetings of youth and they would come in and disrupt it and shout you in your own meeting, you know. And I remember we were having an anti-Vietnam War rally down at Love Park. And they came with loudspeakers and
Nunchucks.
huh? No, that was the Labor Committee. They didn't come with nunchucks. But they came, you know, what's his name? Delbert Africa. You know, now Delbert would eventually go to jail and do 30 years because, well, that's a whole nother story. So when he was getting out, I wanted to see him. You know, I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you about what you did back then. Explain to me the rationale for you attacking an anti-war organization. You know, what was that about? But when he got out, he was so ill with cancer and so on. I said, I can't mess with him, you know. But I guess it's, oh God, what about, They got to be held accountable. Gerald Horne, don't tell me about the 1619 project. I want to know what you was doing and where you were when the crisis hit the world revolutionary movement. To the best of my research, you was silent. You know what I'm saying? Frank Chapman, I know you got a lot to say out in Chicago these days. Beautiful. But I want to know, where were you when the revolutionary crisis hit? You know what I'm saying? Cornell West, I kind of know where you were. I know you celebrated the collapse of the world communist movement. I know that. Now I want you to explain it. Because that was the moral test. When you know what I'm saying? That was the test. And that's what I'm saying. If there's any significance to what we can talk about here, it is understanding that moment. See, and all this other, you know, the Saturday fake school and all this other nickel and dime mess, that don't mean nothing. You talking, but you don't know nothing. I even said it about the American Communist Party, the U.S. Communist Party. That's one of the things we talk about. You know, different cats I know, known, good friends, all that kind of stuff. Dog, where was you? Where were you? What did you have to say? Did you defend principle? You know what I'm saying? You know, you got these cats talking about the abolitionist school and Du Bois this and all that. Come on, money. Don't insult my intelligence. And that's what this helps to establish. Not that much me, but that I can talk about a moment, a period in history that I was a part of, that was a critical turning point, and how we come out of that shit, man, and
a lot of people want to suppress it.
You know what I'm saying? I'm telling you. And you know, I feel it personally, because you took my gig a couple times. You took my job. You know what I'm saying? I was stabbed in the back, mistreated and all that. You know what I'm saying? So I feel a little bit personal, but no pain, no gain. If you ain't willing to sacrifice nothing, then shut the fuck up. Don't come, and really, I'll be for real, don't come around me running off at the mouth. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, you could talk, but don't go too far with no bullshit if you ain't sacrificed nothing, if you ain't stood for nothing. Excuse my street ghetto style right now, but that's the way it is. Because sometimes when you go into a fight, I'm not talking about a physical fight, but when you go into an ideological struggle, you put all your cards on the table. Everything is at stake, because ideas are the most valuable thing that humanity has. When you go into one of them battles, you got to put it all on the line and let the chips fall where they may. And you can't be afraid. If you're a punk, go somewhere else. Get a job in a university as assistant professor of African American studies. Don't make no claim about you down and all that shit, because you ain't. You're a punk. Excuse me. Why are you laughing? No. And we still got to go back up to NYU. Some documents.
I'm not gonna lie, Doc. I think some of those documents are lost to the winds of history.
You really think so, Marie?
Well, maybe we can find them.
I think
Maybe they're in your basement, Doc.
Yeah.
Maybe they're in your attic.
no.
Your library.
But I think party affairs and the transcripts or the audios of the ideological conference.
Okay, I'm putting out a call. If anybody in our comments can find the journal Party Affairs,
From what
which was an internal
Yes.
magazine
Different from
journal,
political affairs.
not political
Different than
Party
political
Affairs in the critical period of the late 80s to the early 2000s, hypothetically.
We'll send you an Avant-Garde.
If anybody knows and is able to find that,
Joe Sims might have it.
yeah, we would really appreciate it.
You should ask Joe Sims.
Yeah, Joe Sims might have it.
Well, they maybe, but there's certain things because, you know, he can talk like, see, you hear different people talk and the way they talk now, that, like they oh and ah. No, money, when it came to the struggle, that crucial fight, you were talking like a little pussy, you know. Why don't you, you know, put that bass, you didn't have no bass in your voice then. So he don't really, they might have it in the party office, maybe.
Maybe.
But I think they turned everything over to the NYU archives.
Just because of time, Doc, do you want to?
Okay, I'm sorry.
No. I think it is important or worth talking about the restarting of the U.S.-Israel war in Iran. Did you want to give your comment?
Just that we know it's starting. A war that the U.S. has already lost and will not win, and that's why they're only attacking a civilian infrastructure. They're trying to punish the Iranian people for having defeated them. That's deeply rooted in the white supremacist mindset, you know? And so the Iranian people have changed the world. The world will not go back to what it was. And this is different than Vietnam. And finally, I think that in the large historical sense, the tremendous damage done by Gorbachev and Western intelligence in collapsing the Soviet state that is now being reversed. Not that the Soviet state will be reborn, but that the world that was possible in that moment is now going to be realized in this moment. So, you know, the triumphalism of the 1990s and we defeated the Soviet Union and communism.
The new American century.
Yeah. Now we're closer to the world of humanity, to the age of humanity, and the end, finally, of the age of Europe.
Well, the one article that we didn't cover today, which is relevant, is Neha's. But I just wanted to bring it up because the core thesis of Neha's article is that the framework that best explains the current U.S. and Israel war on Iran is the civilization.
That's right. I think that's right, Jerry.
Especially right now, like, you can come up with all the explanations that you want of like, oh, there's some master grand strategy behind what Trump is doing, and actually, like, they're doing this on purpose. But I think it really is, like, because as a white supremacist, not just him, but the state itself cannot accept that it's been defeated by Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, by darker people. And that, to me, is the only explanation of why they would restart. And then the Iranians know, like, I mean, literally the response from the Iranians was like immediate of, okay, you want to attack us? First, we're going to attack all the U.S. bases around Iran, in Kuwait, and Bahrain, and Jordan, all these places. And if you're going to start attacking our civilian infrastructure, we'll start attacking, I think this is where, I'm not sure if everything's been confirmed, but the U.S. struck bridges, water desalination plants, which are literally vital for feeding and maintaining the population of people. They struck all of these, like, they struck the airport. And I think, so in response, Iran has hit these US bases, of which there's been a huge cover-up in terms of not revealing the extent to which Iran has either killed American soldiers and basically caused damage to these US bases. But it looks like they're also starting to hit like oil facilities and infrastructure in the other Gulf regions because I think of Iran's leverage at this point is like, okay, like, you want to try to go after us again, you are essentially inflicting what will be a world energy crisis and like basically a world economic depression, and that's on you. And I think most of humanity will recognize that that is a decision that's incurred by the United States and Israel, not by Iran.
But I think everything that we do going forward has to be contextualized by this war. This is terrible, and we must be prepared.
But I just wanted to, I think just affirm something that you had said earlier about the interview, which is my favorite part of the selections that you guys chose. And I think you guys did a great job of selecting, because I haven't read the entire transcript, and I was like, I just made a conscious choice of I can't read through all of it, but the selections that you guys chose are really seamless, and I think it tells the narrative really well. But my favorite part was that period of when you're talking about the 90s, collapse of the Soviet Union and the Million Man March, and the pairing of those two pivotal moments. And there's a moment when you're talking about Angela Davis, and you're like I love you to death, but you're wrong. And I don't know, I just think that there's to be honest, I can't think of any other, and it's not to like put you on like a pedestal or anything, I can't think of any other person that I know of in the left who would be willing to actually go toe to toe and to say like, someone as famous as Angela Davis, like, I stood by you, we stood together in that period, and you made choice. Like, she was part of the committees of correspondence, she was part of that, not just on the sidelines, but part of the active move to break apart the Communist Party and to move in that direction of social democracy and all that stuff. And I don't know, like, that really resonated with me of like, a lot can happen in a person's life, but like you're saying, there are those critical moments where history demands of you, the world and humanity demands of you, that you make a choice. And if you make a choice in a certain direction, like, that stays with you.
You can't recover.
For the rest of your life, But I really appreciate it.
Jerry, you are so, I hate and why I left the Communist Party.
Right.
It was over the Million Man. But the Million, as I said, it was the last straw.
Right.
After Winston, because Winston's theory was to reground the Communist Party in the lessons of the Third American Revolution.
Right.
And so when he talks about these eras from Douglas to Du Bois to King, sadly, most people in the Communist Party thought he was just talking about for black people. No, they were eras in the struggle for American democracy. And you didn't see it, and you still don't see it and can't see it because of this dogmatic Marxism. I mean, and so Du Bois, Winston and them had moved to Du Bois. Gus Hall could never go there.
Yeah, that was also my favorite part of the interview, where especially around Winston's death, and also the conclusions that Henry Winston was coming to, and then he passed away, and then no one picked it up. That part, like, not just about, like what you said about that Winston had understood what Martin Luther King Jr. was leading and trying to do for all of the American people. Like basically this unfinished, unfulfilled revolutionary struggle for democracy.
And he treated King and that Corps as comrades in a common struggle. He saw them as the way we do, as revolutionaries.
Not any different than himself, or let's say the Communist Party. I would agree with that. I would say so. But especially that part, because I mean, you just said it, but I like the way in the interview we were able to basically make it really sharp, this thing of like, since the death of Winston, the party's commitment to black people began to be weakened. It's not that there's no class differences and class conflict. The question is, where's the center of the struggle for democracy? And we had said all the time in the party that the black liberation struggle was the central struggle for democracy. We felt, especially Winston, that while defending the Soviet Union, we had to defend the struggle for freedom in this country in the first place. The black liberation struggle was the key to democracy. There could not be democracy for the working class, for the trade union movement, for women, for any other groups, unless there's freedom and democracy for Black people. And here they dropped the ball. I said, I can't go with this. Yeah, that was, yeah. And I just feel like that, how do we, you know, we've entered the 21st century, but we're in a wilderness confused. And I feel like this contributes to knowing like, actually there was deliberate confusion, deliberate chaos. And this gives us a chance to refine our democratic struggle. In some ways that has a lot, it's not that dissimilar for why we feel really compelled to do 6 weeks. Why we feel really compelled to do 6 weeks of what we're calling the Summer Freedom School. Martin Luther King Jr. and
The Third American Revolution.
yeah, right. A study of Martin Luther King Jr. and the Third American Revolution. Because that was the reason why we had met with Reverend Cavanis, was to talk about doing a 6-week summer freedom school between not just Mother Bethel and the Free School, but also like all the different people we've been meeting and individuals who we've been meeting and talking to across the city, who have all basically pointed out that there's an eagerness to discuss what we're calling the most urgent, fierce democratic questions of today. Or like you could call them undemocratic questions. Things like, you know, youth and children, not as people who are not as problems, but actually capable of being the solution. Or like war and democracy, violence and nonviolence, churches and the moral imperative. And we need to determine the start date, but it's really exciting. I think it's really exciting for us that in many different ways, like the different people throughout the week, we have like different reading groups, different conversations, different studies, but we want to actually consolidate through these open discussions, reading King, looking at clips from Eyes on the Prize, like documentaries, interviews, to actually have this discussion of topics of today. If there is going to be a new future, like a new nation, a different kind of society, a beloved community, what would it take to build a people's movement to achieve that concretely? Like not just voting in new policies, but like a people's movement that changes even the relationships between human beings in the society and the city. And so right now, like the 6 topics that we had brainstormed are, week 1 would be Martin Luther King Jr. and the Revolution of 1963. Week 2 would be, are Black churches capable of revolutionary struggle? Week 3, are children and youth capable of revolutionary consciousness? Well, we're debating some of the titles. Or like children and youth, like what are they capable of? Week 4, nonviolence, the weapon that heals. Week 5, war and democracy. And then week 6, Philadelphia as a 21st century Birmingham. We want to specifically use like the Birmingham struggle and the broader civil rights decade, this broader Black freedom movement, to actually have a discussion about like, you know, we don't have to go all the way back to 1776. Let us actually know and inherit the last American Revolution we had, which was, you know, the Black freedom movement of the 50s and 60s. Like, why was King assassinated? What made him need to be assassinated? And actually, I like something that Doc had said when we were meeting, where he said, you know, in this time in particular, there's a hunger from the millennial, Gen Z, and younger generations for revolutionary options. But young people need to know that revolution doesn't necessarily mean destruction. Revolution can mean the creation of something positive, fulfilling, and complete, something close to God. And then, but also that the other like nugget that I thought was really deep was Doc was like, Martin Luther, we feel more and more convinced that King in this time is to this time, 2026, what Frederick Douglass was to the time of slavery. And so, but just we want to see what is possible if people can seriously come together and discuss like this revolution of 1963, Birmingham, and what it opens up in conversation to talk about Philadelphia and what we want to transform and what we can transform together. So more information to come soon, but we did just want to put that out there because we think it'll be 6 weeks, maybe starting in August.
It'll be during Saturdays.
Yes, it would basically be a free school. free school.
I guess we're considering whether the locations would alternate.
Yeah, we're considering location, whether we should alternate between Mother Bethel and the crucifixion, or if it should just always be a Mother Bethel, like for the 6 weeks. So we'll see. But yeah, you're the first Mother Bethel. You're the first Mother Bethel member to hear it. So congrats.
Go to a prediction market, place a bet.
What? Yeah. So that's us announcing the 6 weeks we're trying to build together. And I also feel like it's something we want to think about it, but it's something I was going to talk to you about, Alina. But like, I feel like this 6 weeks, it does make sense for how do we also make it available for young people, like even children, like who maybe on Saturdays are looking for something to do in the mornings. Like I feel like there are ways. I do feel like there are many different kinds of young people and children who throughout the summer are looking for something Saturday morning. So we're just trying to figure out like how to make it a thing. So yeah, we're excited and we'll have more details coming up. Yeah. Okay, well, any other last comments or things to talk about?
Okay, I can read some comments. There were quite a lot. Okay, so some comments on Shantanu's article. Roots and Bark said Whitney Webb has done some great work in the past exposing certain aspects of the Epstein network before the files were even made public, and said Shantanu is on point. Alan Dulles rescued and incorporated Nazi scientists for a reason. Todd said Hegseth testosterone boosting for the military as part of the eugenics project. New commenter named N Corner asked us to integrate accelerating runaway climate change and ecological overshoot and how that threatens human extinction. Todd said the #1 threat to the planet is the ruling imperialist class, and that can only be overthrown with unity and determination. Roots and Bark said, my conspiracy theory is that a major part of the Epstein agenda was to create breeding programs to create more quote-unquote white people using various methods, including IVF. Then they have untraceable kids for blackmail or other purposes to carry out their agenda. Someone named Kokolan Man said, F Israel, the world stands with Iran. Let's see, Just RM said, the other thing about statistics in response to Alina is that pools of populations can be skewed. It also makes me think about NGOs having focus groups to extract so-called direct experience of people, but then they just exploit that information. And then they also liked this idea about the degrees of separation because it shows, it unravels the deception.
Yeah.
And then let's see. Bombalai says India needs to clean up their own act. And then David Ball said, Doc is correct. Anybody could get a card saying that they're a party member of the Communist Party. The professor's so right. Anyone could join the party. Never read Lenin, and you only need a little knowledge. And then said, yes, comrade, it's better to have fewer if you're not actually down. Okay, Reddy said, I love all the revolutionaries you mentioned. It can be a disservice to younger folks when these people don't talk directly. It can be a benefit, and then said that they enjoyed the discussion that you had with Jared Ball? Dr. Ball?
Oh, yeah.
And then also said, Doc is open to these dialogues, but I wish Gerald Horne, Angela Davis, Uhuru Asante, Robin Kelly, etc. were just as open. God bless Doc. He's right about Cornel West. This is not petty gossip. It's clarifying, and I believe feeds the confusion and stagnation in the Black movement. And it explains the LFT, I guess, the state of things today. A sincere reckoning is due, a conversation at least. And then David Ball said, salute Comrade Doctor. I do love it, so. And then, let's see. Okay, and then Jahan had a comment that I think I lost, but I have at least part of it if you can pull it up. Okay, so he said this interview includes an incredible history of ideas going back to the 1950s. Doc's life lessons about sacrifice and commitment are key for the youth to commit to struggle in a principled way. The lessons from the turning point of the collapse of the Soviet Union are key for this new turning point of a global transition and the transition in the American people. There are too many boomer activists perpetrating about their so-called experiences, but they actually have little to say to young people. I think because they weren't present in that period of crisis. Doc's life is a shining example of the opposite. And then Roots and Bark said, the USA is completely on board with blowing up the world economy if they can't be on top. It's both a white supremacist and, according to Roots and Bark, a patriarchal ideology that's exhibited by those who do family annihilation. And then lastly, it seems like Reddy is interested in someday hearing your view on Kwame Ture and the AAPRP and the Hero House. Reddy says, specifically on their inability to capture the hearts and minds of Black people after being around for 50 plus years. But those are our comments for today.
Good discussion.
We'll see everyone next week for another free speech. Oh, right.